Day 5 to 7:33 a.m. Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Captain Della Rosa and his subordinates were once more bewildered by what Mark had just said. One of the reasons were because he guessed correctly what Dominator was, and another was because he said that the person in question was now heading to their location with his men. No matter how they tried to think of the reason or method how he did it, they were not able to imagine the current answer. Mark, on the other hand, was sure about his deduction. When he noticed a mutator he did not know of in his area of detection, he immediately thought that this person was the leader of the third faction the female soldier was talking about, Dominator. There was no way this mutator would be under someone. Using the emotional fluctuations of this mutator, Mark deduced that this person could only be a leader and not a subordinate. While the soldiers were still skeptical about what Mark had just said about Dominator coming here, they saw a group of people moving towards their direction quite a distance away. As the pathway they were walking on was a straight path parallel to the school building to the south of the school, there was no way that they would not be able to see the approaching group. "Everyone, get behind me and the soldiers and stay alert. Odal, in case that something happens, take everyone away." "Yes, master." Odalina replied while the others nodded and positioned themselves behind how Mark ordered them to. Hearing the orders Mark gave his group, the soldiers also moved in front of them. There was no doubt that Dominator and his men came to meet Mark's group. Aside from that, there would be no other reason for these people to come near the building where their squad had settled. As for fleeing, it was out of question. Mark also knew that fleeing would surely inflate the ego of the other group, and the prestige of the soldiers would also take a huge blow. Though it would be dangerous, Mark also did not want to show weakness to the other party. If he did show a sign of weakness, the other party, who were obviously not coming with good intentions, would try to exploit it. "It seems that this bastard is after your group. Do you know why?" Captain Della Rosa stood beside Mark and asked. On the other hand, Mark looked at him with incredulous expression as if he was looking at an idiot. Seeing Mark's expression, the captain was confused and asked another question. "Is there something wrong with my question?" Knowing that the captain really had no idea, Mark sighed. "You're asking about why those guys are after us when you are the reason. Seriously." "Me?" To that question, Mark did not answer, as Dominator and his men were already near them. Captain Della Rosa also did not have the luxury to pursue the reason and stepped forward. On the other hand, Dominator stopped about 2 meters away from where the soldiers and Mark's group stood. "It's a very rare occasion to see you all the way here, Dominator. Do you need something?" Captain Della Rosa greeted with a sarcastic smile. In response to the squad captain's greeting, however, Dominator confidently smiled, not minding Captain Della Rosa's attitude. "I heard from my men that a new group of survivors arrived. I got curious as to why some like you seem too respectful to the leader of that group. I can't help but feel the urge to meet them." Dominator spoke with an amiable tone. Nevertheless, the soldiers did not seem to fall into it. The soldiers frowned even more due to this, especially Captain Della Rosa. He could now understand why Mark said that he was the reason why this abominable person came here. After Dominator spoke, the armed man beside him whispered something into his ear. After that whisper, his eyes fell on Mark, who was standing slightly behind Captain Della Rosa. Dominator ignored the captain and stepped forward towards Mark. "You must be the leader of the group that had just arrived, am I correct? This gentleman is called Dominator. If you may, I would like to invite you and your group to our base for some welcoming gesture." Dominator introduced himself and stretched out his hand towards Mark, inviting a handshake. While he was doing so, his eyes did not leave Mark and was measuring him. On the other hand, Mark was the same. There was no need to guess what was inside the mind of the person in front of him, so he was looking at his appearance and deducing what kind of ability this person might have as a mutator. Looking at Dominator, who was wearing a loose striped formal suit, a fedora hat and a cigarette on his hand, he looked like the stereotypical criminal syndicate boss. Along with how he acted, there was no doubt about it. As Mark observed Dominator, the person was waiting for his answer to his invitation. Nevertheless, Mark's expression betrayed the expectation of the other party. Mark looked towards Captain Della Rosa and spoke. Squad Captain, there's no reason to stay here anymore. Bring us to your quarters already. Mark decided to ignore the other party. Not because he wanted to shame the other person but because he had no interest in his invitation. Furthermore, as a person who hated doing introductions, answering to a handshake was out of question, especially to a person doing an act in front of him. To what Mark did, not only Dominator froze, also the soldiers and the members of his group found his action unbelievable. What is, you don't have a sense of courtesy, do you? Dominator spoke with his cramped up smile. Finally, Mark turned to him and responded. Yeah, I don't, especially to people who like to fake their own courtesy in front of me. Peeved. No able to hold back anymore, the female soldier talking to Mark earlier let out a stifled giggle. She really seemed to hate this person for some reason, and seeing Dominator fall into a setback, she could not help but laugh. Knowing what his subordinate was doing was inappropriate, Captain Della Rosa feigned a cough and glared at the female soldier, stopping her. However, it seemed that her laugh fueled emotions of the men Dominator brought with him. You bastard, our leader are politely inviting you. It should be your honor to be personally invited by our leader. One of the men stepped forward and bellowed. Unfortunately, his bellows were met with a disdainful stare by Mark. What's with that stare? The man stammered as he tried to threaten Mark. Nevertheless, he did not receive any reply as the person who he was shouting at was not paying attention to him anymore. Squad Captain, what are you waiting for? We don't have much time to waste here. Mark urged the captain to leave once more. All right, men, let's go. Captain Della Rosa could only nod and order his subordinates to continue before he turned towards Dominator. Dominator, it seems that you wasted your time coming here. Our guests have no interest to your invitation, so you can go now. After the captain said that, he did not wait for the reply of the person and turned around, ushering Mark's group to move on. I gave you a chance, but you don't want to cherish it. Dominator spoke as Mark was about to leave. To that, however, Mark turned his head to look at him and smiled. His smile, however, was full with ridicule. Why would I cherish a chance to become your subordinate? I don't have time to play kingdoms with you. Mark then turned his back and left, leaving the stunned Dominator. Dominator did not expect that everything in his ploy seen through. He politely addressed the other party as he was measuring why Captain Della Rosa was respectful to him. If he was able to invite the aforementioned group, he would draft them into his faction while sounding out everything he wanted to know. If it did not work, he would play words with the other party to get what he needed and plan their next actions afterwards. Nonetheless, not only he did not receive any answer, he was even ridiculed. Furthermore, it seemed that not only that person was able to see through his ploy, and it looked like that he was even able to see through his personality and goals. That made him unable to react towards the other party, incurring ridicule to himself further. No matter what, he found it inconceivable as his rage started to boil inside him. Leader, what are we going to do? One of his men asked. You're asking me what to do? What else can we do? Return to base. Go. As he could not control his anger anymore, he started to lash it out on his men. You will pay for this. Dominator bellowed in his mind as he thought of that person who ridiculed him. Asterisk asterisk. That felt really good, the look in his face is satisfying to look at. As they were further away now, the female soldier did not hold herself back anymore and laughed. Still, no one reprimanded her now, and even Captain Della Rosa was smiling as he looked at Mark. His reactions and response were too out of the norm that he even managed to make the despicable Dominator to freeze. Mark, on the other hand, was observing the reactions of the soldiers to what happened. It seemed that these soldiers had a deep hatred towards that faction leader, that they were in glee seeing him face a sudden setback. Thank you for showing that to us. The female soldier approached Mark and tapped his shoulder like a close friend. As the female soldier was feeling overly close, Mark frowned, but he tolerated it. She did not have any lingering motives. It was just her pure personality that she did that without knowing. Mark, are you sure about that? Falling out with those people is a bad idea if you ask me. Captain Della Rosa spoke. It doesn't really matter. We don't have plans to stay here. As long as what we came here for is done, we'll leave. Mark replied. Then, as he remembered something, he added, "Actually, it's better if you also leave this place as soon as possible." Why is that? The squad captain and his subordinates were all baffled as to why he suddenly warned them. Sooner or later, this place will be overwhelmed by the infected. This place is secure though. It shouldn't fall unless an unknown appear. If that case happens, we also have several countermeasures to exploit. The female soldier interjected. I'm not talking about that. It's not good to talk about that here. I'll tell the reason later. With that conversation, the two groups made their way to their destination together under the watch of the curious refugees nearby. **********Day 5 to 8:02 a.m. Firenze Townhouse Complex Subdivision, La Jolla Street, Buhay na Tubig, Imus, Cavite. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. Chief, we can't hold on anymore. A police officer bellowed on his radio while atop a roof of a house shooting his assault rifle. Not only that police officer was atop that roof but several more. They were all busy firing their guns on the infected in front of them. All of them were currently facing the west side of the subdivision where the farmlands were located, and what they were looking at was hell. A part of the wall separating the subdivision and the farmlands had already broken through. Among the rubble that came from the broken wall was a body of a 5-meter-long infected scorpion that was killed using several grenades. Still, even though the infected scorpion was killed, the wall had already collapsed. Now, not only that the police officers in Firenze was not able to rebuild the wall, but with the number of infected currently charging towards their position, everyone knew that they would not be able to keep this place safe anymore. If Mark was here, he would know what was happening. The police was facing the wave that was returning to the shore at the moment. Right now, they were trying to hold back thousands of infected. Not only was that, but there were a lot of mutated infected among the ranks of the enemies. Right now, the police were not trying to eliminate the infected anymore, but they were buying time for everyone to prepare and evacuate. Once the evacuation preparations were done, they would abandon this place. AAHHH. A fearful scream was heard as a 3-meter-wide infected spider managed to slip up the wall and lunged towards one of the police officers on the roof of the house. Pang! Damn it! SP-02 Agbayani, whose arms were now covered in metallic sheen, immediately went to aid the police that had just screamed and punched a hole on the head the huge spider. Still, he was already late. Half of the waist of the police that was caught was already missing from his body. He was already lifeless with his eyes wide open in horror. The preparations are ready. Everyone retreat. Chief Mallory's voice echoed in everyone's ears through the radio. Hearing that command, everyone felt that they had been pardoned. Everyone immediately retreated while continuously firing towards the infected that were now flooding through the broken gap on the wall. It did not take long before a convoy made up of more than a dozen vehicles left Firenze. The people inside vehicles were all in remorse. They had only felt safer for several days and they had to face the infected world once again. As for the ranks of the police, they were despairing. Although they managed to leave and facilitate the escape, they lost more than half of their men due to the infected insects and mutated infected that were able to scale the roofs of the houses they stood on. As the infected were too many, they were not able to aid their comrades in time. Now that they left Firenze, none of them knew what kind of life they would face outside the safety of the walls. During the 5th day of the apocalypse, the Firenze survivor settlement had fallen into the hands of the infected. Day 5 to 7:45 a.m. 4th grade building, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Inside the classroom that was now converted into a briefing room among the soldiers, Mark sat onto one of the chairs surrounding the table at the center of the room. Together with him were May and Abigail, who did not want to separate from him, while the other party was Captain Della Rosa, the female soldier, and 2 other soldiers that seemed to hold a good position in the rescue squad. As for the other soldiers, they were dismissed and they all went back to their own duties, while the other members of Mark's group were brought to another classroom to rest. For Mark's group, It was really good for them to have a breather despite how early it was due to the stress they suffered during the time they were setting up traps, fending off the infected and their vehicle being chased by thousands of infected. As for Laylaps, Mark gave her the duty of watching the scaredy oversized beetle to ensure that it would not escape, though by the looks of it, the beetle had no intention to do so either. The huge beetle was quietly lying down beside Laylaps at the corner of the room while watching everyone else in the room. "Now, can you tell what you soldiers need from me?" Mark asked as he swept his gaze to the soldiers that sat around the same table. Hearing his question, the squad captain seemed to feel relieved that Mark wanted to go straight to the point. "Before everything, I'll introduce my subordinates first. This is Irene McCarran, this is Joey Kadungan, and this Alderic Renemaran." Captain Della Rosa pointed at the female soldier, the male soldier beside her right and the other male soldier to the left of the squad captain respectively. Seeing that Captain Della Rosa did not ask for May and Abigail's names, it was obvious that the information about them had already been relayed to this squad. "Actually, it's like this. As you probably know, our squad shouldn't be staying in this place at all. Our squad was dispatched to rescue a government botanist that went on vacation leave and went home a week ago. Along the way, we are allowed to rescue as many survivors as we can to our capacity, which was what we did. However, during the way back, we encountered an unknown decimating our ranks and failing our rescue operation." The squad captain sighed and continued, "We managed to escape along with the survivors we brought and the botanist we rescued, but we lost a dozen of my men and several more were severely injured to the point that they won't be able to fulfill their duties in the future as soldiers anymore. We still have enough manpower to defend from normal and weaker mutated infected, but we don't have the capability to fight anything stronger than those anymore. Due to that, we are stuck at this place. So, you want us to help and escort the remaining of your squad back to Bay City?" Mark interjected. "That's right." Captain Della Rosa nodded. "You seem to be putting too much trust to me and my group. Do you think I'm not skeptical to this? When we called for backup at the headquarters, they said that they won't be able to send one in the short time period. The headquarters seems to lack manpower right now, and I also understand since we lost several squads due to the unknowns appearing in several places. It is really fortunate that we managed to escape. When I asked for other alternatives from the HQ, the general suggested finding you and your group that are supposed to be roaming this area in search for people. So, it's the general that seemed to put that much trust in me, huh?" Mark frowned. It was good that there was someone trusting him this much, but if he was going to throw troublesome things to him because of this trust, Mark rather not have that. "It's as you said. As I said before, I'm also skeptical to this suggestion, but upon seeing your group now, it's really a good thing for us to encounter you. There are several mutators in your group, am I correct? If that is the case, then escorting us is not that hard for your group. I also heard that your group plan on going to Bay City after your goals here is fulfilled." Captain Della Rosa said with expectation. "You had just mentioned it. I'm searching for a few people and I can't leave without them." "I know. In that case, feel free to make use of our men to search for those people. It will be faster that way, right?" Mark contemplated for a bit. It was true that it would be faster, and it was also true that they planned to go to Bay City afterwards. Probably, it was Paula who informed them about it. Furthermore, it would be safer if they had soldiers in their company. His eyes then dilated as his mind jolted for a bit. He then looked towards the female soldier that sat beside the squad captain and observed her face. Darn, Mark cursed in his mind. When he thought of soldiers accompanying them on their journey, his mind jolted as the premonition he saw before in his dream appeared before his eyes. During one scene in his premonition, he saw the face of this woman, but it was quite blurred as the person was someone he had not met yet. Now that he saw her face and linked her to his premonition, he knew that his premonition was somehow linked with these people. "Is there something wrong with my face?" The Irene touched her face and asked. Seeing Mark staring at her intently, she could not help but feel embarrassed. "Gerger?" May also asked. Although Mark was staring at Irene, she did not feel jealous but felt worried instead. It was because when she looked at Mark's eyes, she saw the same glint she saw back then in Firenze. It was that glint that pushed her to confront him and asked him what the matter was. Hearing the voice of the two, Mark jolted back from his trance and shook his head. "It's nothing, I just remembered something." He then looked back to Captain Della Rosa, who looked baffled about his behavior. "What will we get in exchange for escorting your squad?" To his question, the squad captain did not seem to be surprised. After all, they were not forcing them but hiring their group. "We already prepared for that. After we successfully arrive at Bay City, you and your group will be rewarded with weapons, ammunition and supply. The most important ones are the free pass and Bay City citizenship." Mark's eyes shot up as he heard some unfamiliar terms. As if knowing what was in his mind once more, the female soldier that had already recovered from embarrassment interjected and explained. "The free pass allows your group to go in and out of Bay City freely. In Bay City, the refugees are confined inside the protected zone and are not allowed to go out of the zone unless there are special circumstances. With the free pass, your group will be marked as capable and will be allowed to go in and out without any interruption from the soldiers and the government. The capable I'm taking about are being able to fight the infected effectively. Currently, there are only 2 groups in Bay City that are unaffiliated with the government or the military own these free passes. Both groups have evolvers in their members. As for the citizenship, it will allow you and your group to own a house, private room or building in the Bay City. Those places still came with a price, but at least, your group will be allowed to buy one as long as you have the capital. If you don't know, Bay City is separated into 2 settlements. One was for the refugees and soldiers, while the other is where you can find the government officials and other people who have high standing or necessary expertise before the apocalypse came. Furthermore, the refugee settlement is also divided into several parts, with one being a housing project. With the citizenship, one of the privileges is that you can own a house or building there. That is if you don't want to live like the normal refugees that can only stay in their shared tents in the tent city in the refugee settlement. "There's such distinction between people in Bay City?" Mark asked with a frown. "It can't be helped. The current government and the remains of the military can't accommodate everyone. In this case, the refugees will not slack either. The refugees can work at the settlement, and if they do a very good job or earn some reputation, they can also be rewarded with citizenship. In that case, they could also work harder and buy a house for their own." It was the Joey who replied to Mark's question. That explanation of Joey made Mark understand. That policy was to make the refugees to not only rely on free rations they could get from the government. Not only that it would lighten the load of work the government had to do, but would also push the refugees to a certain goal. It had always been a problem with the refugees in the past, especially during disasters. After contemplating for a bit and weighing the pros and cons of the deal, Mark spoke. "All right, I agree." Mark decided to agree, as the terms they gave was that hard to decline. The soldiers also felt relieved and happy hearing him agree to their request. However, before they could thank him, Mark continued. "I have a few conditions though. Is the payment not enough?" Alderic, who was silent the whole time, could not help but speak with a frown. "It's not about the payment." Mark shook his head. "I want to be the one who will decide on what route we will take." The soldiers were baffled with the unexpected condition. "You want to be the leader for the whole way?" Captain Della Rosa asked. "I don't want to lead. Your men will follow your orders and my group will follow mine. What I mean is just that. I will choose what route we will take. Which street to take, which road to pass through, which bridge to cross. Something around those." "Why? It's kind of strange for you to ask a condition like that," Irene asked with a very confused expression. "I have my reasons, but I can't tell you all. In any case, my group will bring your squad back to Bay City without fail as long as I will choose the route." Mark insisted. The 4 soldiers discussed it for a minute or two. Considering the situation, his condition was not really overboard, even though they were confused as to the reason why. "All right, we agree with your terms." Captain Della Rosa spoke as he stood and stretched his hand towards Mark over the table, wanting to shake his hand. As they had come into an agreement, Mark had no reason to decline the outstretched hand, so he shook it. "Anyway, you said that you will help find the people we're looking for, right?" Mark asked. That's right. Captain Della Rosa nodded. Then in that case, I'll give you several names and see if you can find them among the refugees here inside the school. Mark took out his small notebook and wrote the names of people he planned to look for along with Rosamie's brother. After tearing the page of notebook that Mark wrote the names on, he passed the torn page to the squad captain. After receiving the torn page of notebook, Captain Della Rosa started to read the names with his eyes when his eyes dilated. Mark, this Chervil Sandoval, why, is something wrong? Mark asked with confusion. The botanist we were dispatched to rescue has the same name. Hearing that, Mark found it inconceivable. It was because it was the name of Rosamie's brother. Can you bring us to him? It's fine. The squad captain agreed. Mark then turned to May. Mayor, go with Gale and call Mrs. Rosamie, Amika and Mikio. Let's see if this botanist is the one they're looking for. Yes. May replied and looked at Abigail. Gale, let's go. May and Abigail held hands together as they made their way out of the room. You're lucky to have a wife and daughter like them. Seeing the two beautiful girls go out, Irene could not help but tell that to Mark. However, his reply choked not only her but the other three men with them. I don't even have a girlfriend yet, not to mention a wife. Mark shrugged his shoulders, making the Joey and Alderic boil with jealousy. Both of them were single men and their looks were not bad either. Alderic was even pursuing Irene for some time now. The two single men, seeing how intimate Mark was to the beautiful girl that always stuck beside him, they could not help but feel that this guy's ancestors might have done something that was rewarded by the heavens and felt a bit jealous. It was just their training as military stopped them from having impure thoughts. Nevertheless, the beautiful girl Mark was intimate with was actually not his wife and not his girlfriend either. In that case, what would happen if the two enter into a relationship? Just how intimate could they get? The soldiers could not help but ponder. They did not notice that Mark was looking at them like they were idiots and started to step back thinking that it might be contagious. Day 5 to 8:02 a.m. 4th grade building 2nd floor, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. After the conclusion of their meeting with Mark, Captain Della Rosa sent Master Sergeant Joey Kadungan to search for the people on the list Mark gave them. At this moment, Captain Della Rosa and Staff Sergeant Irene McCarran were leading Mark and the three members of the Saccharano family towards the dwelling of the botanist, Chervil Sandoval. Rosamie with her children were following behind Mark and the two soldiers with glee as they confirmed to Mark that Rosamie's younger brother was indeed a botanist. There was no doubt that this botanist was the younger brother she was looking for. Nay, scary uncle. It's really good that we came with you, isn't it? We found Oji without any trouble. Amika suddenly said while after they climb up the stairs. To her words, Mark nodded. I won't deny that. This scary uncle is not humble at all. Yeah, I'm not. So stop talking. Boo. Hearing the exchange of the two soldiers leading them could not help but smile bitterly. Despite the difference in age of Mark and Amika, the two were talking to each other like close friends. Both will try to reprimand, joke and tease each other, but none of them would get angry to the other at all. Even though Mark had been stopping Amika from talking several times already, the two of them did not stop their exchange at all until now. On the other hand, Rosamie agreed with what Amika had just said. If they decided against joining Mark's group, they would probably be looking for her brother blindly without knowing where to find him. His address, after all, was actually further away from this place. If not for following Mark and his group, they might not have found this place at all. After all, they ended up in this place after finding their way to Roland's house and encountering his partner there. Reaching the endmost room to the right corridor, Captain Della Rosa knocked on the door. Wait a minute. A male voice was heard and soon after, the door opened revealing a man who had resemblance to Rosamie. He looked haggard and it seemed to complement with the aura of a researcher he was exuding. His age was around a year younger than Mark as it looked like. Captain, Staff Sergeant, do you need something? Chervil asked as he knew that there were no plans for the military to leave yet and escort him away once more. However, When his eyes fell onto Rosamie that stood behind the two soldiers, his eyes widened in disbelief and glee. "Big sis!" Chervil exclaimed. "Chervil," Rosamie smiled with tears at the corner of her eyes. After the two soldiers opened the path between the two, the siblings hugged each other. Watching the reunion by the side, Mark started to walk away. There was no need for him to interrupt this family from their dramatic reunion. "Scary uncle. Where are you going?" Mark tried to slip away without anyone noticing, but it seems that he could not escape the senses of the two children. "I have no business here, so I'll be going for a walk." "But, just spend your time with your family, all right?" Mark patted the green-flowered hair of Amika and Mikio's head with both hands. "Yes." The two children smiled and nodded. The two turned around and joined the embrace of their mother and uncle. Chervil looked stunned seeing the appearance of his niece and nephew, but it just took him a second to recover and happily embraced the children of his older sister. Though it seemed that he had some questions in his mind, it looked like what matters the most to him were the smiling faces of the two children upon seeing him. As Mark walked away, Captain Della Rosa sent Irene to accompany him and guide him around the settlement while they wait for the results from Joey, who was sent to search for Mark's friends. Asterisk 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 inside the room being used as dwelling by Nikki and her group, Dorothy, Roland's younger cousin, was left alone. It was fine since the place was the same building being used by the faction led by the local government officials. No one would try to loiter around this place without permission. "Dorothy, come, I'll show you something." A familiar woman approached the 10-year-old Dorothy inside their dwelling. Holding the girl's hand, the woman brought her out of the place. "Where are we going?" Dorothy asked without suspecting the familiar woman. "Don't say anything. It's a surprise." Asterisk 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 leaving the family reunion, Mark decided to walk around the school premises. This place was where graduated his primary school years after all. After he graduated, aside from times he compulsory brought here to vote during elections, he had never stepped into this school to explore the place. After he graduated, there were a lot of changes to the school, both good and bad. It was good that more classrooms and buildings were built, but the school looked cramped and out of proportion. Mark decided not to bring anyone as he looked around, especially May, since she would just gather around unnecessary attention. As for Abigail, the scene of suffering refugees was not good for a child like her to see. For the others, with the threat of the faction dominator led could bring, it was better for them to stay at the building where the military was based. If he was alone, he could handle himself better and could freely escape if something might get out of hand. "I told you that I want to be alone, right?" Irene, however, who was sent to guide him around, just would not go away as it the order she received from her superior. "I received my orders. I can't disobey that," Staff Sergeant Irene McCarran nonchalantly replied while following behind him like a guard. "Seriously. I know that immoral soldiers are the worst, but this is what is annoying about the upright ones." Mark muttered. "What's wrong with that? It's one of our duties to follow orders of the higher-ups." "Every order?" Mark stopped walking and looked at her. "Not all orders. Only orders that won't go against my morals," Irene said confidently, puffing out her chest. "Seriously, you're a woman, so don't do gestures like that. It doesn't matter to me, but that will be provoking to others. I'm advising you," Mark said as he glanced at her before turned around and continued walking. Understanding the meaning of his nonchalant words, Irene felt dejected with her face red in embarrassment. She was a tough chick in her squad, but somehow, she could not stand the eyes of this guy that seemed to penetrate into her mind. However, she did not feel repulsive to those eyes, but rather, she felt more interested. Recovering from her embarrassment, she immediately caught up to him. "You really won't leave me alone, will you?" Mark harumphed. "I won't, I'm just following orders." With that, Mark decided to ignore her as he walked around the compound. While walking around, Mark saw the dwellings of the refugees and their current state. Though the refugees were not in a bad situation yet, it seemed that it would not take long and these people would become desperate. Not only the children but the adults too were showing symptoms of malnutrition. Furthermore, the living spaces were far from sanitary. The smell was unbearable for Mark, whose senses were enhanced by his evolution. If not for his strong resilience, he would probably flee away from this place already. Thinking that his friends could be living in this kind of place, Mark shook his head. It was really pitiful. With the food and supplies they brought from the mall, they could still last for about a week despite the number of people in his group. What would happen afterwards was not much of a concern since they had the capability to search for food themselves as mutators and evolvers. Their situation was in complete contrast against the situation of the normal people. Mark? Someone called him as he approached a certain room. It was not accidental. Mark was really going to this part of the refugee building as he detected some familiar emotional fluctuations. The person who called upon Mark was a man around a year younger than him. His face was above average, though it could not be said that he was handsome. However, his face was now stained with grime and the clothes he was wearing seemed like something that had not been washed for several weeks already. Mark fully recognized this person. He was one of the guys closest to Mark and Roland and was a part of Mark's circle of friends from high school. Though the communication between them had lessened after graduating from high school, it was no doubt that he was a close friend of his. What Mark did not expect was to find him in this place, though, since his house was quite away from here. Thinking about it, Mark thought that it was possible. He probably fled here after the infected reached their place. Mark. It's really you. The man approached Mark, who was just looking at him with a smile. Not able to stop his emotions, he held Mark's shoulders and looked at his face. Seriously, Arvi, you don't have to hold my shoulders like that. Your hands are dirty. Mark said with contempt, but it was obvious that he was teasing the man in front of him. Hearing what Mark said, the man frowned before stretching his hand towards Mark's face, trying to smear the dirt on his face. Mark, of course, dodged. Don't dodge, damn it. It's been long since we saw each other and you're looking at me like that. You already learned how to look down on people, huh? Arvi spoke with an aggrieved tone, but his mouth had a bright smile hung in his face. Looking at two full-grown men chasing each other like children trying to smear dirt on one another, Irene was speechless. Stop it already, will you? Mark bellowed. Knowing that he probably reached the limit of Mark's temper, Arvi finally stopped. The two men bear hugged each other. Mark did not really mind Arvi's dirty appearance. He just could not help but try to get back from all the teasing he received years before from this guy. What are you doing here? Arvi asked. Well, some things happened and I'm here with my group. Anyways, how are you faring? I heard that you already married. Well, yeah. You didn't come though. It was already late when I heard about it from Roland. By the way, I came here with him. You came here with Roland? Really? The two was about to continue their conversation when they saw the person in question walking anxiously while turning his head and gaze here and there as if he was looking for something. Roland. Arvi called out with glee. Seeing Arvi, Roland looked stunned, but after he saw at Mark, he somehow looked like he saw the answer to his prayers. While looking at Roland, Mark was frowning. His mental state was quite erratic, as if he was worrying about something. Not waiting for Arvi to speak again, Mark approached Roland. Is something wrong? Dorothy is missing. Roland replied with worried expression. He had already lost most of his family, with only his younger brother and younger cousin remaining. He was too worried for his remaining family to be missing at this period of time. Dorothy, your cousin? Yeah. She should be there where Nikki and her friends are staying, but when we went there, she was gone. Hearing that, not only Mark frowned but also Irene and Arvi. Arvi knew that it was not the right time to catch up. By what you said, that Dorothy should be the girl with Ms. Faja group, right? Irene interjected with a question. Seeing the female soldier, Roland was surprised for a bit but nodded. That's right. All right, I'll be going. I'll relay this to my squad and mobilize them to help searching for her. Irene said with serious expression. There's more to this, right? Mark asked, seeing her expression. I don't know if this is connected, but there had been reports of women and children disappearing before. The main suspects we had been Dominador's men, but we don't have sufficient evidence. Dominador's men, right? Mark propped up his chin. He then turned to everyone. "Arvi, is there anyone with you right now? Family or relatives?" "My wife and Jason." The others were gone. Arvi looked dejected. "Jason is here too. Where is he?" Mark was surprised. It was because he could not detect Jason, who was Arvi's younger brother, around. That guy went out with his own team earlier. Who knows what happened? He became stronger after he went berserk when our family was slaughtered by the infected. "I see." Mark then turned to Irene. "Ems McCarran, there's no need to move your squad. I'll just request you to bring this friend of mine and his wife into your quarters. But it'll be more efficient if I'll be the one doing the search." Irene wanted to deny him, but seeing the look in his eyes, she could only nod. Seeing the staff sergeant agree, Mark turned to Roland. "Roland, meet up with Nikki and her group. I'll go and search for your cousin." "Can you really find her?" Roland asked worriedly. "Don't underestimate me. We have our first lead, so there is a place to start the search." With that, Roland saw Mark's eyes glow with a faint red color. "All right. Be careful." Roland did not know how Mark intended to look for Dorothy, but knowing his friend's current capabilities, he decided to trust him with this. Mark nodded to everyone and started to move. As time was of essence, he did not hold back. Activating his adrenaline, he jumped over the walls and roofs like a ninja under everyone's bulging eyes. Not only Arvi and Irene, even the bystanders and refugees that saw him were shocked. After all, every jump he made was just a few inches below 3 meters. It was not a jump that a normal human could do. Jumping over the structures built around the school premises one after another, Mark moved towards the eastern side of the school. Day 5 to 8:37 a.m. Central Pathway, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark was currently running on the roof of the covered pathway they walked by earlier. Along the way, many soldiers were alarmed seeing someone running and jumping in fast speeds. Some of them thought of stopping Mark, but there were those soldiers who were with Captain De La Rosa when he welcomed Mark and his group, and thus the soldiers did not attempt to do so. Being welcomed by Captain De La Rosa himself, his standing was not someone they should bother. Rather, it would be better for them to guard the place tighter. It did not take him too long to arrive at the southeastern area of the elementary school. Mark jumped towards the second floor of a classroom building where no one could see him and let his emotional perception to cover the whole area. Mark then noticed, it looked like that the faction dominator led not only stayed here in the elementary school but also annexed the high school to the southeast. There was the Eastern Bacoor High School next to the elementary school at the southeastern part. The high school had a small campus, but it had several buildings enough to handle the number of students before the apocalypse. The high school campus was separated from the elementary school campus by tall walls, but it seemed that Dominator and his men managed to secure the high school by creating a hole in the wall connecting the two campuses. Looking at this, it seemed that the area Dominator's faction managed to annex was larger than both the local government and the military factions had. Covering the area, Mark frowned. It seemed that the number of people under Dominator's rule was also larger. He could detect about 200 people at the area, with about 150 being confirmed as Dominator's men. He could assure that as their mental fluctuations were very stable. It would not be like that unless they had weapons, had confidence in themselves, or they had someone in their back like a group or a powerful leader. In this case, they all had that. As for the remaining people, there was no doubt about it that these people were the ones Irene was talking about. There were faint fluctuations indicating children, but all of the fluctuations had a negative vibe to them, while most had despair in their minds. There were even those who seemed to want to die at the moment. These people were all gathered at the building to the southeasternmost building of the high school. Not only that building was in the most dangerous location, it was even sparsely fortified. Mark looked at the building inside the elementary that was annexed by this faction. It was because he detected several familiar fluctuations. He knew that it was Nikki, and the fainter fluctuation should be Dorothy. However, he noticed that there was another one. "It looks like I'm late." Mark frowned as he muttered. He jumped off the building and onto the tree beside it before jumping on the roof of his former college campus. Though it was called a campus, It was just a large building with a dozen of rooms. His batch of students before was the pioneers of this school, so they did not need too many rooms to accommodate the very few students at that time. That was also the reason why the college changed location. It was to accommodate the influx of the current students. Now, this building was annexed by the elementary school and was being occupied by Dominador's men. Using the roof of the former college building as a pathway, he managed to make his way towards the building where Nikki and Dorothy was undetected. It seemed that Nikki and Dorothy was in different rooms. However, while Dorothy was with another familiar fluctuation, Nikki seemed to be in the same room as Dominator and his men. It seemed that Nikki was shouting. Making his way closer and straining his ears, Mark tried to eavesdrop on their conversation. "Air is Dorothy? You said that you'll return her if I follow you all here?" Nikki bellowed. "I did make my men say that. I'm not one to break my promise, but you need to do something for me." Mark heard the rough voice belonging to Dominator. "What do you mean? Don't worry, it's just a little favor. After you do it, I'll return the little girl." "What do you want? Say it." "I want you to bring that man here, the one who was welcomed by Della Rosa. I want him here alone. That shouldn't be hard to do, right?" Dominator sounded smug. "Why do you think that I will do that?" "You will do it. That is if you want to see the girl living. Or else, you know what will happen." Hearing that much, Mark knew that it was because of him. Shaking his head, Mark decided to move. He did not want to implicate people because of his actions. Even though he had reasons in his mind as to why he ignored this Emperor wannabe, he did not think that this guy would make his moves too early. It was not even an hour since the thing happened. As the second floor of the building where Nikki was inside and the roof of the former college building was side by side, it would be easy to make his way towards the second floor of the building. Ting! Drawing his machete, he tapped the metal railing of the second floor and hid behind the wall of the second floor. The metal sound soon had drawn the attention of the man on guard at the second floor. Seeing that there was nothing that could make that sound on the second floor, he thought of ignoring the sound. However, he somehow got thought that there would be something behind the wall for no reason. Because of that, he tried to peer behind the wall over the railing. He then saw the blade of a machete slicing down on his neck. The man did not manage to let out any scream as blood immediately entered his throat. All he could do was stare at the man wearing all black with fear in his eyes as he saw the eyes of the man glowing red. The man pulled his body off the railing and made him lie down on the roof behind the wall with his neck bleeding, painting the roof with blood. With the loss of blood and the blood blocking his lungs, it did not take him long before he died. Looking at the dead man, the glow in Mark's eyes vanished. He had just used his emotion induction to reinforce the curiosity of the man and make him peer onto the back of the wall without alerting the man. Making two sounds in a row would sure make the man alert, and such he resorted to this move, which made it more successful. Sensing the people on the second floor, he jumped towards the second floor after ensuring that no one would see him from below. He hurriedly made his way towards the stairs while crouching. Hiding behind the wall beside the staircase, Mark waited for a few seconds before swinging his machete once more. Another of Dominador's men was making his way up to the second floor. When he reached the corner, he saw something black swipe towards his neck. He tried to step back, but black thing was too fast. The next thing he knew was the pain in his neck as he saw the black thing pass through his neck. With that, the man fell with his eyes open that remained until he stopped moving. Mark pulled the body of the next victim and placed the body next to the first man on the roof like fish being dried under the sun because of their bleeding necks. The blood started to flow down the roof and drop by drop, fell into the ground below. Returning back, Mark ignored the hallway that was stained by blood as he made his way towards the last room on the second floor. It was the room where Dorothy was being held up and the reason why there were guards on the second floor despite the fact that the place supposed to be secure. As there was only 2 people in the room, Mark made his way in. There, he saw the familiar 10-year-old girl. He knew that it was Dorothy. There might be no interaction between Mark and this girl, but as Roland's friend, he saw her from time to time. Also with the fact that this girl shared the same birthday as his, he would never forget her. However, the other person in the room was shocked seeing Mark enter the room. Mark also recognized this person. She was Mara, who was Jeanette's little sister and a member of Nikki's group that he encountered earlier. Both Mara and Dorothy was tied up and gagged, but Mark could not help but detect the guilt in Mara's subconscious. Furthermore, it seemed that unlike before, she could not look at him eye to eye. Considering the possibilities, Mark thought of something after seeing her like this. Mark made her way towards the two and removed Dorothy's gag first. "Uncle, who are you? Are you here to help us?" Hearing that, Mark almost spurted out blood. It was fine with Amika calling him uncle, but with Roland being his friend and Dorothy being the latter's cousin, it should be just big brother or something along that. After all, this girl also addressed Roland as brother if Mark remembered it correctly. Ignoring what she had just addressed him, Mark spoke. "I'm your big brother, Roland's friend. I'm here to take you out of here." Mark then proceeded to untie her. "Big brother? Where is he?" "He's back with our friends. If you don't believe me, you can ask that woman later." Mark pointed at the still tied up Mara. He then paused and looked below. It seemed that Nikki had left already. He felt that he needed to hurry even more. After making his way towards Mara, he removed her gag and untied her. "Just leave me here." Surprisingly, Mara said that as guilt overwhelmed her. "So, it's really you who brought this little girl here?" Mark spoke under his breath, making Mara tense up. "That Dominator probably proposed something to you and you fell for it, didn't you? It's likely about your sister, right?" He continued while Mara looked at him with wide eyes. "Don't ask how I know." Mark proceeded to untie her. "If you knew about it, then just leave me here. I deserve it." "Nope. If there were people to judge you, then it will be Nikki and Roland." Mara stared at her. Tears started to flow from her eyes. "Why?" "It's because the girl behind me don't want to leave you here, or else she won't come with me," Mark said. There was no need to ask that to the little girl. As she did not know Mark even if he introduced himself, there was no way that the girl would just go with him after leaving Mara here. If Mark was to ask, it was likely that he would leave Mara here and escape with Dorothy, but as Roland was within his group, incurring the ire of even just a single person that would join him in the future could potentially ruin the harmony within the group. In that case, it was better to prevent it from happening. "Follow closely behind me." After being untied, Mark led them out of the room. The three crouched on the hallway and stealthily made their way to the roof of the former college. "Hey! What are you people doing there?" A bellow was heard while Mara was jumping over the railings of the second floor. One of Dominator's men sleeping on the opposite building suddenly woke up, and the first thing he saw was a woman jumping over the railing of the second floor. The man immediately picked up his assault rifle and tried to fire on the suspicious people, but before he could do so, his body was already drilled with holes. His body slumped down, bleeding profusely. Still, his bellow alerted everyone in the buildings around, and even Dominator, who was still at the first floor of the building where Mark rescued the two, hurriedly walked out. Seeing what happened, Dominator looked up and saw shadows on the rooftop of the former college running out of sight. His men had just died, and it would be a blow to everyone's confidence. Since that was inevitable, Dominator could not let the perpetrator get away. His body bulged and his business suit tore up. His arms covered in monkey fur were revealed and his muscles became more distinct. In his mouth, his first pair of cuspids grew longer like fangs of a beast, while his neck and jaw started to be covered with long fur. "R-A-A-A-A-A-A!" Dominator bellowed as thumped his chest with both fists. He then jumped towards the second floor of the building and grabbed the railings with his nimble hands and propelled himself towards the roof of the former college. "So, you're a weremonkey." Dominator heard a voice the moment he landed on the dome-shaped roof. There, he saw a person that could not be more than familiar to him standing on the middle of the roof waiting for him. He would not forget this person that confronted him earlier. "So, you are the culprit," Dominator said with a rough and nasal voice. "I am." "So, what are you going to do?" Mark said with a sneer. "What are you sneering for? Die!" Dominator charged towards Mark. Day 5 to 8:51 a.m. Former CVSU campus rooftop, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Dominator, who was currently looking like a half-human and half-monkey with a bulky body and crimson-colored fur, was charging towards Mark in rage. However, before he could even come close to his target and pummel him to death, he halted as he was greeted with a rising nozzle of an assault rifle. His eyes dilated. Due to his hate towards Mark, he neglected the fact that Mark was armed with a gun. TSST, TSST, TSST. 3 muffled shots were released from the assault rifle as 3 bullets were sent flying towards Dominator's direction. Nevertheless, none of the bullets hit the target as Dominator stopped his charge before the shots were fired and jumped to the right. Seeing that his sudden attack that he did the moment Dominator charged at him was evaded, Mark frowned. The perception of the mutator in front of him was not something to joke at. He noticed that the slight movement of his gun, despite how fast it was, alerted his enemy and immediately did the maneuvers to evade the moment the shots were fired. Trying to gauge the abilities of the mutator in front of him, Mark shot several more bullets towards his enemy. TSST, 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 yet every shot missed. Dominator was able to evade and he started moving to dodge the moment the gun were fired. It was as if he had a keen grasp on the trajectory the bullet would fly. Mark could do the same thing, like avoiding, but the method and skill were different from what the weremonkey in front of him was displaying. With his empathic ability, he could deduce which person was going to pull the trigger, and concentrating his adrenaline to his eyes and brain would make his perception faster and slowing the bullets to some extent, enabling him to avoid the gunshots. The skill Dominator was displaying was different. Mark was sure that this was not something Dominator acquired from his mutation, but something he built up from experience. During the times Dominator was evading, Mark could feel that Dominator's emotional trigger towards the bullets were non-existent, as if his mind were blank as he dodged. Watching his movements and detecting the emotional fluctuations Dominator had, Mark concluded that this person was dodging the bullets by instinct. TSST, TSST, TSST. Mark fired another burst of bullet, which made him quite indignant to fire once more. It was because he started to feel that he was just wasting bullets. On the other hand, Dominator was getting vexed even more. The person in front of him seemed to be predicting his movements and fire at the place where he should be moving towards, which made him jump back and forth without being able to advance. If not for his keen sense to danger engraved in his mind due to countless dangerous experiences, he would already be sieved with bloody holes already. Mark kept firing at Dominator without hitting, while the latter was not able to advance further in order to avoid the incoming bullets flying towards his direction. In simple words, the two were at a stalemate. "Hey! Fight with me fairly!" the angry Dominator bellowed. He admitted himself that he was blinded by rage and neglected the fact that the enemy in front of him had a gun. Even if he did not, he would not be able to use guns while he was in his mutated form either. In this form, his hands and fingers were enlarged, and as such, not to mention firing one when he could not even hold a gun. "Don't wanna." TSST, TSST. Mark answered nonchalantly and fired another 2 bullets towards Dominator. Dominator could not finish his words and jumped to his left to dodge. His mind was slowly being filled with anger. "It's your fault making your way here alone and without weapons. Why should throw away my advantage?" Mark shot a smug look despite the fact that his heart was aching for needing to waste ammunition on this guy. It was really not worth it. During the time Mark met this guy earlier, he purposely provoked Dominator for 2 reasons. One was because he hated the farce this guy used to try and entice him to go to their base. The other was because Mark was looking for mutators to feed Jeanette. As Dominator was known to be an evil person, he would not think twice of eliminating this guy at the right time. He just did not make his move earlier, as May and the others were with him while Dominator had his men. May and the other members of his group might get caught in the middle of the crossfire. Now, however, seeing what kind of mutator Dominator was, Mark became indignant to feed him to Jeanette anymore. If he did, Who knows if his precious specimen would also get covered in fur? He would never try to risk that. TSST. Mark shot another bullet, making Dominator back up. You should know that we have your friend's cousin, right? That's why you're here for sure. I don't think you will want anything to happen to her. Dominator tried to make Mark compromise. However, he saw his enemy shooting a stare at him as if he was looking at an idiot. This made him even more infuriated. Damn it. Dominator cursed inside. He thought that this person did not care about that child at all. Then, Mark spoke. What are you talking about? I already rescued your hostages. There's 2 of them, right? What? Dominator's eyes dilated. If that really happened, then it was too fast. He thought that this person had just arrived here to rescue them, and the 2 hostages were not rescued yet. They had just informed Ms. Faja about their conditions, and if this person was to initiate his rescue, he needed to scour the whole area, which was filled with his men, unless he was able to pinpoint the exact location where they hid the child. However, he just pinpointed that they had 2 hostages even when they also informed Ms. Faja of only 1. It meant that he might have really rescued them already. You don't believe me? Look there. There are 2 of your men there with slit necks. Mark said smugly as he lowered his gun while pointing towards the area of the roof behind the building. Clouded by his thoughts of disbelief and anger, he turned his head to see where he was pointing at by reflex. There he saw of his men, dead, bleeding from their necks and placed on the roof like fish being dried under the sun. Shit. Dominator cursed in his mind. TSST, 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 TSST. TSST, 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 TSST. During the lapse in Dominator's mind, Mark fired 10 of his remaining bullets in his clip. Realizing that he unknowingly fell to his enemy's ploy, he immediately tried to dodge, but it was late. The most he could do was to step his left foot back and make his right side face Mark's incoming bullets while covering his head. TSHK. Though 4 bullets missed, the rest riddled the right side of Dominator's body, spewing out blood from the wounds. RAAHHH. I'll kill you. Dominator's mind became enveloped with rage faster due to the pain and the humiliation he felt from falling to his enemy's ploy. Mark, on the other hand, felt elated. Not only some of his shots managed to hit the target, it managed to raise the opposite's anger level. It was barely below tolerable range of what Dominator's mind could handle before losing his rationality and going berserk. It was really good that Mark positioned himself to face the way a little bit against the sun. In this way, he could conceal the fact that his eyes were constantly glowing red ever since the time Dominator transformed to his mutated form. For Mark, he felt that it was hard to influence the mind of mutators even with his emotion induction. It was the reason he was looking smug and continuously taunted and created that ploy. He was slowly increasing Dominator's anger. Nevertheless, what he was doing was really effective. The reigning though at Dominator's subconscious was domination. He wanted to lead, be a king or an emperor. That was also why Mark said that he did not want to play kingdoms with him before. However, everything that Mark did was not only disrespectful but also insulting to the eyes of this aspiring ruler. And thus, Mark was successful in building up this guy's anger level. Seeing that Dominator was still able to charge despite his injuries, Mark could not help but curse this guy's tenacity and toughness. But Mark also expected this, as this guy was a mutator. Common sense would not totally apply to their kind. TSST, TSST. Mark fired 2 more bullets and it did not miss, but Dominator purposely made his arms hit by the bullets and did not stop his charge at all. TSST, TSST, TSST. The magazine of Mark's assault rifle was finally emptied. The 3 remaining bullets also hit Dominator's arm. Managing to close onto Mark, Dominator pulled his right bloody arm backward and swung it forward. The movement was fast, and due to that, the wounds created by the bullets started to spew out blood profusely. However, due to Dominator's anger, he was not affected by the pain anymore. He only wanted to pummel this disrespectful bastard to meat paste. Dominator's charge was fast, and so is his attack. A normal person would not be able to dodge it. Unfortunately, his current adversary was Mark. Concentrating his adrenaline to his eyes and brain, Dominador's attack coming towards him started to slow down. Mark took a single step back, making the smash miss. Due to the force and speed of the attack, Dominador's fist continued towards the roof they were standing on. Bam! A 15 inches diameter hole was created on the roof, with the surrounding 2 more inches around the hole dented inwards. Strong. Dominador's arms were as strong as a bullet. If Mark was hit by a single punch by him, it would sure feel like he was hit by a cannonball. Seeing Mark dodge his attack without problem, Dominador's eyes dilated. Even though he was about to be consumed by his anger, he still had rationality left in him. He knew that his attack was not any random person could dodge. Yet, this person in front of him dodged it without batting an eyelid. Dominator followed his attack with a diagonal swing of his left arm upwards. But Mark then slanted his body to the right, dodging the attack by just 2 inches. Mark could even see the pores under the fur on Dominador's arm due to the close distance. Seeing his second attack miss once more, Dominator followed it with a front kick using his right leg. This time, Mark stepped his left foot back and dodged the attack by a few centimeters. Damn it! Dominador's anger started to rise once more. He already unleashed 3 deadly attacks and all the attacks missed. Furthermore, there was not even a shred of panic on Mark's face, but he was still looking at him smugly. However, Dominator regained a part of his rationality after he noticed the eyes of Mark. As the two were already engaged in close combat, there were times that Dominator would block the rays of the sun, and thus, he noticed the red glow on his enemy's eyes. He could not help but regain a bit of rationality as he felt goosebumps and danger. Nevertheless, as a Dominator, he had no thoughts of backing down. For someone aiming to rule, backing down would be a humiliation. Because of that, he continued his combat exchange with Mark. Still, none of his attacks hit Mark, making him angrier for every second that passed. From the last attack, Mark found a leeway and jumped back. He then released the lock of the clip of his assault rifle, making the clip fall onto the roof they were standing on. Mark then reached for his back. Seeing that, Dominator immediately closed in. He should not let this person reload his gun or he would be forced to separate. Due to desperation, he swiped his hand, targeting the assault rifle. The assault rifle was hit and immediately broke into pieces, leaving the strap on Mark's body. Dominator felt elated seeing the assault rifle break, but for some strange reason, Mark did not stop reaching for his back. It was then his eyes dilated once more. Mark was not reaching for another clip for the assault rifle but reaching for his pistol. As Dominator had just attacked his assault rifle, he was totally open. Mark drew the pistol as fast as he could and fired towards Dominador's chest, where his heart was located. He did not try to aim at Dominador's head because he would be able to dodge it with minimal movement, but how about his enlarged torso? TSST, TSST, TSST. Mark managed to fire 3 shots, but it seemed that it was not fatal. At the last moment, Dominator was able to pull his body back, diverting the aim from his heart to his lower chest. The 3 shots were not fatal but severely injured his organs. Dominator jumped back several times, clutching his bleeding chest, with blood also trailing down the left corner of his lips. Pain was apparent to his face despite the huge amount of anger he was feeling inside. Day 5 to 9:01 a.m. Former CVSU campus rooftop, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. YOU. Dominator spoke, clutching his bleeding chest with his eyes filled with indignation. He was a known leader of an underground mafia which based here in Bacoor. Drugs, firearms, prostitution, they deal with a lot of illegal business under the backing of select officials from the government. Due to that, they were able to maintain their freedom, and even the police was not able to make a move on their group. Still, for the sake of taking the eyes of the populace to their movements, they had to throw out sacrifices that led to shootouts and capture of their insignificant members. When the outbreak came, he got caught in the middle of a crucial business transaction. Unable to find shelter immediately, he and some of his men were bitten due to the number of the infected despite their weapons and fighting prowess. Filled with remorse, he left his men at that place and fled back to their base. Despite his body covered in blood and the calls of his men as he passed by, he hurried towards his office and locked the door. Before he passed out alone in his office, he remembered his goal of conquest. He knew from the start that there was no use to chase conquering the world, but he at least wanted to conquer the underground business in this country. However, he woke up. Not as an infected but something else. His arms and legs were covered in fur, but he had an overflowing strength in them. Tapping onto that strength transforms his body into something that looked like a half-human and half-monkey. Still, he did not care about his appearance. With his new prowess and the imminent fall of the government, he could rise up and conquer everything. Since then, he built up his current group, annexing the surviving small-time gangs and illegal groups in the area, and every single one of them was under his command. With his current abilities and the number of men under him, no one ever tried to go against him, with the exception of people who held the same firepower as his group, which was the local government and the military. Despite that, he never fell into disadvantage ever since they managed to annex this part of the settlement. Even though they could not make a move against the two other factions, the other two were not able either. In case that a confrontation happened between the factions, not only the members of the factions would incur repercussions, but the innocent refugees would also suffer. Thus, he was able to start his goal as someone who conquers, living luxuriously while not fearing of anyone going after his and his men despite their vile deeds. Now, what was happening to him was a total humiliation. The thing he was most indignant about was that he did not even know what was going on. Rage was starting to envelop his mind that he was about to explode. After all, it was the very first time he experienced a humiliating setback after the apocalypse came. "What are you?" Dominator bellowed, but his voice was not as confident as before and his eyes dilated in shock. Not only that he did not gain advantage towards their fight, but he was even severely injured. Furthermore, Mark was not following by the books and even managed to use his past experiences he accumulated to trick him. Mark purposely let the magazine fall while reaching by his back like he was going to get another magazine and reload the assault rifle, but he actually planned to draw another gun from the start. To his question, however, Mark sneered. He stared at Dominator with the red glow on his eyes intensifying and answered. "Who do you think you are for me to answer you?" Dominator's eyes dilated even more from rage hearing that reply. To question him about his identity was a complete humiliation. As someone who viewed himself as a potential ruler, it was infuriating to be questioned about his authority. His anger was rising very quickly that his eyes started to become bloodshot. "Leader!" A shout was heard calling for Dominator. With his mind clouded by rage, he turned around by reflex and saw several men on the open hallway of the second floor of the building where Dorothy was supposed to be tied up. They were Dominator's armed men and were there to assist their leader. Unfortunately, with Dominator's current state of mind, their call made the injured Dominator give Mark a huge opening. TSST, 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 TSST. Dominator's body was riddled with several more holes in different parts of his body. Due to his anger and severe injuries, he was not able to put up a defense. All the 5 bullets Mark fired at that opening all hit Dominator's body, and 4 of the bullets drilled holes on Dominator's abdomen. Puh! Dominator staggered backwards, spewing blood from his mouth with his eyes filled with disbelief and frenzy. "Leader!" Dominator's right-hand man bellowed, seeing the current state of their revered leader. Without wasting any more time, Dominator's men aimed their guns at Mark and fired. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. Several dozens of bullets flew towards Mark's direction, making him retreat. Mark then raised his gun once more and fired parting shots at Dominator. He emptied the clip of his pistol, riddling Dominator's body with more bloody holes before jumping off from the roof. FCK. Seeing that the assailant jumped off to the other side of the building, Dominator's right-hand man cursed. They then started to make their way towards the roof and approach their leader that was currently kneeling due to his severe wounds. They thought of bringing away their injured leader. Unfortunately for them, it was not over yet. Mark did not escape. He just made his way towards their vehicle to get another set of weapons and planned to come back right away. With Dominator succumbing to his injuries, Mark would not make a mistake of not using it to his advantage. During time Mark started the fight with Dominator, Mara had already made her way down the roof using the same route Mark used to climb up there. Carrying Dorothy on her back, she was running as fast as an Olympic athlete. Mara was also an evolver whose legs were enhanced. In terms of speed within Nikki's group, she was the fastest and thus, her position with the group was a scout. Now however, she was using her fast legs to bring Dorothy to safety. She already did a mistake, she did not want to another. She was actually reluctant to leave Mark there alone, but as Dorothy's safety was essential, she could only obey Mark's instructions. It was to bring Dorothy to the building the military used as their quarters. While running and ignoring the inquisitive stares of the people on the way, Mara saw a silhouette of a woman from the distance walking hurriedly towards the same direction. "Boss!" Mara called out to Nikki, who was going towards the military quarters to find Roland and Mark. Hearing the call, Nikki turned around and her eyes dilated not only because of shock but also glee. "Dorothy!" "Mara!" Nikki shouted as she ran back. In a few seconds, the two women and the girl stood in front of each other. Nikki immediately pulled Dorothy into her embrace. She was really worried. After she confronted Dominator, she agreed to his terms so that Dorothy would remain safe for a longer time even though she had no intention to follow the terms that hateful man gave. Nikki was actually going to find Mark to discuss what they should do. However, not long had passed and she actually saw Dorothy safe and sound being carried by Mara. "Mara, what happened? Why is Dorothy with you?" Nikki hurriedly asked. Though she was happy that Dorothy was now here, she did not think that Mara would be able to rescue the girl. Dominator's area was filled with his armed men and it was basically suicide to go there and save Dorothy alone. Panting, Mara was about to answer but the girl beat her to it. "Sis Nikki, sis Mara and that UNC scary-looking big brother saved me, right?" At the end of her sentence, Dorothy turned to Mara. Hearing that, Mara looked at Dorothy with shock just to see the 10-year-old girl also looking at her. Dorothy then shook her head slightly preventing Mara to say what really happened. Understanding what Dorothy was trying to say, Mara felt touched. She did the girl wrong but the girl was still speaking up for her. This was a debt she needed to pay in the future. Now however, there was an urgent matter. That's right, but now is not the time to ask questions, your boyfriend's friend." Mara tried to recall his name. "Mark?" Nikki asked confused but thinking that Roland might have told Mark what happened. That could be the reason why. Though, she was still confused as to why Mara and Mark would be together. "Yes. Mark. He stayed behind to hold off Dominator and his men to let us escape." Mara looked worried. She was also saved by Mark though the latter really had no intention to do so. "What?" Nikki was shocked. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. They then heard the sounds of multiple guns firing which echoed across the whole settlement. "We need to help him." Nikki was about to charge back but Mara held her arm. "Don't. We won't be much of help if it's just us. Mark have connections with the military, right? We should ask them first for help." Hearing that, Nikki nodded. The three hurriedly made their way towards the military building. On the military building however, another scene was happening. Roland and Irene immediately reported what happened to the captain who was currently with Joey and Alderic discussing a few things. Hearing that Mark went to rescue the missing cousin of Roland and the possible culprit, Captain Della Rosa frowned. As their manpower was now lacking, it was not good to clash with that faction of criminals. However, if Mark was there, they should prepare to support. Though he was a little hesitant about it, Alderic, gather up our men that are not in guard duty. The time for us to confront Dominator and his men came earlier than expected. Joey, contact Counselor and Chairwoman Palabrica. Tell them what was going on and ask them for support. Yes, sir. The two soldiers answered with a salute and hurriedly went to fulfill their tasks. Inside the room botanist Sherville was staying. He shared his experiences with his older sister and her children. It was then that Emika and Mikio suddenly stood up from their seats while looking at the same direction. Emika. Mikio. Is there something wrong? Rosami asked her children. The two children looked at each other and nodded before replying to their mother. That scary uncle is fighting someone. Hearing that, Rosami frowned while looking worried. Mark was their benefactor, so she would at least be concerned about his business. Are you two sure? We are. The two children then looked at each other communicating. Mom, stay here with Lil brother and Oji. I'm going to help that scary uncle. But it can be dangerous. Don't worry, Mom. If it's dangerous, that scary uncle will sure protect me. Emika assured with a bright smile. Without waiting for her mother's consent, she bolted off out of the room. Her green hair grew and latched onto the railing before she jumped down from the second-floor hallway to the open space in front of the military building with the assistance of her hair. At the room where the rest of Mark's group was currently staying, the girls were chatting and the group spending on different activities together. Abigail, Odette and Siegfried were even playing on the phones Mark lent them before. As for May, she was standing by the window looking at a certain direction as if she was staring at something far away. Gerger, be careful, she muttered under her breath. It was then that the curled-up Laylaps stood up looking at the same direction May was looking at. Under everyone's confused gaze, Laylaps faced the large beetle resting by her side. Arf! Laylaps barked at the beetle, jolting it awake. Gweeee! Rarf! As if conversing, the two let out sounds alternatively. Looking like the two came to an agreement, the beetle climbed up to Laylap's back and the Laylaps bolted out of the room with the beetle. What's going on? Where are those two going? Melissa could not help but voice out because the two were behaving strangely. However, no one was able to answer that, and May, who seemed to know, feigned that she did not hear the question. It was then, another strange thing happened. Cling, ting, ting, ting. They heard a loud sound of metal breaking and falling onto the floor. Looking at the source of the sound, everyone's eyes dilated. They saw the always quiet Jeanette standing in front of the chair where she sat on before. By her foot were the broken chains that were supposed to bound her. Furthermore, she was looking at the same direction May was looking at. Then, with a fast speed, she tried to run out of the room. Everyone else quickly retreated away while Odalina quickly caught Jeanette, but shockingly, Jeanette was overpowering her. Unable to hold on, Jeanette pried Odalina's grip open and pushed her away. Due to the strength of the push, Odalina was flung away towards the wall about 3 meters away. As she was freed from restrictions, Jeanette ran out in her fastest speed. Surprising enough, she was running the same direction Laylaps took. Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. Everyone heard the loud noises caused by a number of guns being fired. Day 5 to 9:04 a.m. 4th grade building, 1st floor, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bakor City, Cavite. The sounds of the gunshots echoing across the settlement early in the morning jolted everyone into a state of panic. The refugees outside their dwellings hurriedly ran back and closed their doors, while those who were able to fight the infected prepared themselves in case. Furthermore, the scene of soldiers that were speaking on their radios while frowning as they all ran towards the direction of their headquarters did not do any help to quell their stirred minds. Everyone thought that the infected were attacking once more. After all, it was not the first time gunshots echoed across the settlement, but the previous times, it was all because of the infected. Thus, the refugees thought that the same circumstances were happening. None of them thought that the cause was a completely different event. Back inside the classroom where May and everyone were gathered, Odalina propped herself up while coughing. The force Jeanette used to push her towards the wall was no joke. If it was a normal person, their bones might have shattered already. The cracks on the wall left after Odalina crashed onto it was the evidence. What bewildered everyone was that no one knows the reason why the docile Jeanette suddenly erupted and rushed out. Furthermore, the moment they saw Jeanette running after Laylaps and the beetle through the window, they suddenly saw Emika jump off from the second floor of a different part of the building, joining the dog and the beetle. The three went towards the same direction with Jeanette following behind them. Furthermore, the sudden sounds of gunshots made everyone unsettled. Knowing that it might get dangerous as Jeanette was still an infected, Odalina wanted to chase after her. Nevertheless, she was grabbed by her arm. Looking to the side, Odalina saw May, who was shaking her head. "Young miss. Do you know what is happening?" Odalina asked with bewilderment. Everyone inside also turned towards May in askance. I know a little, but please, just stay here and protect everyone. Things might get dangerous if not handled properly." What May said was a little cryptic to everyone, but Odalina could only nod. "But what about Jeanette? I'm afraid she might attack someone. Also, that's strength." "It should be fine. All of you might not know, but Gerger told me last night before sleeping that Jeanette was starting to develop her own consciousness. It's less likely that she will attack anyone. Aside from special food, I think." Hearing that, everyone was shocked. An infected that was developing consciousness was something really surprising. However, they were lost as to what she meant for special food. Before they could continue their conversation, Irene arrived with Roland. Behind them were Arvi and his wife Jane. Roland introduced Arvi and Jane to everyone, allowing the group to know Arvi's relationship to Mark, who was the leader of the group. Then, Irene finally relayed what was going on, making everyone perplexed as they looked at Roland, who had one of his remaining relative missing. It was then that Nikki arrived with Dorothy in tow. However, Mara was not with her anymore. Seeing Dorothy that was safe, Roland was very elated and he forcefully hugged the girl, even lifting her up. Nikki then relayed what Dorothy and Mara told her, updating everyone about what was happening. Knowing that what Mark did, everyone was perplexed, especially Roland, who was the one who asked him for help. Though he saw his best friend being able to jump up that high, in actuality, he never saw Mark fight ever since he knew him. If something were to happen to Mark just because he went to save Dorothy, he would not know what to do. Nevertheless, while Roland and the others who they had just met today were panicked, the rest only had troubled expressions on their faces. We know now why Laylaps and Amika left. Jeanette also probably went to where Master is. Odalina nodded in realization. Seeing their troubled faces but calm reactions, Irene stared to them with wide eyes. "Are you people worried about him, your leader? He's facing a mutator and his armed men? What if he faced danger? He could die." However, it seemed May took what she said as an insult. She looked at Irene while frowning. "Don't underestimate Gerger. He already faced thousands of infected before and remained alive. Such insignificant ants can't harm him." Looking at May, Irene gulped. In her eyes, the shy-looking beautiful girl vanished. What replaced her was a beautiful woman that only had Mark in her eyes and everything else was insignificant. However, the next moment, it seemed that May lost interest in her and became impassive once more while staring towards a certain direction. At the vehicle, Mark completed his preparations and was about to head out under the watch of the two soldiers that were left to guard their vehicles. He was carrying the M79 grenade launcher, a PSG-1 sniper rifle and a USC submachine gun. However, before he could hang the bag containing the magazines and ammunition on his back, he felt several fluctuations coming towards his direction. Knowing who were coming, Mark was surprised. "Scary uncle." Mark heard a bright childish voice from the distance. Soon, the 5 reinforcements came in front of him. He saw Amika riding on the back of Laylaps while hugging the large beetle. Behind them, he could see Jeanette and Mara, who was following behind her sister. Mark could not help but scratch his head. It was one thing for Laylaps and Amika to come to his aid. Laylaps as a dog had strong senses and thus, it was not surprising for her to come, and the beetle probably came here due to this independent dog. As for Amika, she also had a strong enough ability to sense her surroundings. Mark first noticed it when they were leaving the city hall. Despite the fact that the MB Sprinter had a heavily tinted window, she still managed to find him and even waved at him as they left. However, why in the world was Jeanette in here? It was sure that Mara saw Jeanette out of her leash and hurriedly followed, but Mark could not fathom why this strange infected came here. "Nay, scary uncle. Where's the enemy?" Amika inquired as she looked around, not even realizing that the large beetle was now struggling to get away from her embrace. Mark. "You're fine. Thank goodness." Mara, seeing that Mark was fine, felt relieved, but she could not help but feel perplexed seeing Mark fully armed. It was not hard for her to discern his current intention. While the Amika and Mara were in the midst of speaking to Mark, Jeanette walked towards him and started sniffing his body. With a darkened complexion, Mark grabbed her head and gently pushed her away. "What are you doing?" Mark could not help but voice out, but Jeanette suddenly grabbed his jacket and pulled it towards her mouth. She then licked that part of jacket. Seeing this, Mark hurriedly pulled his jacket away, but he realized what was going on. It seemed that Jeanette was drawn by the clash between him and Dominator. The part of his jacket she licked was stained by Dominator's blood when he shot his chest. Sighing, Mark spoke. "Mara, right? Since you're here, I have a task for you." "What is it?" Mara immediately approached him. "I'll leave your sister under your care. We'll deal with Dominator and his men." But Mara was elated that she would have the time to spend with her sister, but since her sister was an infected, she doubted that she would be able to rein her in. However, before her eyes, Mark turned to Jeanette and pushed her inside the vehicle and made her sit down on the sofa. "Stay here. Stay. No food if you move from here." Mark, with red glowing eyes, spoke like if he was training a dog. Mara wanted to spurt blood from her mouth seeing her sister being treated like a dog, but remembering that she was supposed to be a mindless infected, Mara could only sigh. At least, her sister seemed to be different from the others. Furthermore, her sister was actually heeding Mark's commands as she remained on the spot while staring at Mark. Unknown to them, Mark was using his emotion induction to Jeanette, which allowed her to perceive his intent, as it was obvious that she could not understand everything he was saying. Though it was faint, Jeanette's newborn consciousness reacted to his intent, and he finally felt relieved as his intent seemed to be understood. Knowing that Jeanette would remain on the spot, he turned to the others. "Mara, keep an eye on her, all right?" Mara nodded without hesitation. Looking at the golden dog, the four-horned beetle, and the little dryad, Mark sighed and spoke. "Since you three are already here, I'll give you tasks. We're going to take down a bunch of criminals. Then, scary uncle, I'll help, but give me and my lil bro a bar of chocolate each." "Do you think I have those?" "Scary uncle, lying is bad. Gail told me before that you have several packs being cooled inside the freezer." Mark could only slap his forehead hearing that. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Day 5 to 9:14 a.m. South Building, 1st floor, Eastern Bacoor National High School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Dominator was being nursed by only medic on their group. Due to the lack of medical supplies, Dominator could only grimace in pain as the bullets stuck in his arms and legs were being pulled out one by one. As for the ones in his torso, though he would not die from it, there was still the need to remove the bullets through surgery. Dominator's mutation led to his body turning into something like a monkey's, which highly enhanced his arms and legs. His weakness, however, was his torso and head. Furthermore, it was likely that he would die if Mark managed to shoot him even once on his head, which, strange enough, he never did. Still, that action of Mark even made his anger rise as he felt that Mark was looking down on him. "Matthias, gather everyone. We'll deal with that bastard called Mark and his group. The women in his group are all for you to enjoy as long as we kill him. If the military interfere, we'll also deal with them." Amidst the pain, Dominator bellowed his orders to his right-hand man. "Yes, leader." Matthias replied, but before he could go out of the room, one of their high-ranking men barged into the room with a look of horror in his face. "Leader, what is going on?" Matthias, who was about to leave, asked. "Sir Matthias, leader, we're trapped." Hearing that, Dominator jolted with a confused expression. Ignoring the pain, he asked, "What do you mean?" "Leader, our exits were blocked with thick vines. Even the rooms where we are keeping the hostages were covered with vines." "What are you saying? Vines? What is going on?" Dominator could not fathom what his subordinate was trying to say. However, as his subordinate stepped forward to answer, bang! Crash! His subordinate's body then fell with a bloody hole behind his head after a loud sound of a gunshot and the glass on the window breaking. Shocked by what happened, The men inside the room tried to go out of the room. Then, thump, boom. An explosion occurred by the door they were about to pass through. The people who were late to go out were flung away groaning in pain, but those who were early, all perished on the spot with incomplete bodies. Among the dead bodies was Matthias, who stood right beside the door. And now, only half of his head remained while staring at Dominador's direction. Seeing what happened, Dominator, the medic and the few of Dominador's guards were shocked. But as if pouring salt to their wounds, they heard a mocking voice shouting from the outside. Dominator. Surprised. You made the move first, so you can only blame yourself. Today, your kingdom will fall before you can even build its foundation. Thump. Boom. Ah. Another explosion occurred outside the room, which was followed by painful bellows of Dominador's men. Now, all of Dominador's anger dissipated. His face paled as he spurted blood. He was breathing too heavily that his wound on his chest and abdomen that had already stopped bleeding opened up once more. Thump. Boom. And another explosion echoed. Then, following the explosion, the sounds bullets raining from above sounded, drilling his men outside with holes. He then saw one of his close subordinates running outside the room through the window. However, before he could even seek shelter, his fell with a splatter of blood coming from his temple. Dominador's guards could not help but swallow their own saliva as they watched what was happening outside. One of them took a peek beside the door and saw their men who wanted to escape, but all of their escape routes were blocked with sturdy and thick vines. Thump. Boom. The armed men gathered by the blocked entrance were blown away by another explosion. Most of the ones closest to the explosion were dead with mangled bodies. The guard who saw that felt his knees weaken as he slumped to the floor. He looked at their leader, Dominator. L leader, our brothers were being slaughtered. What are we going to do? The guard spoke with a quivering voice. Bang. Crash. Through another window. Another bullet passed through and drilled a hole on the head of the guard that had just spoken. Everyone was now quivering as they retreated away from the windows and closed the doors. But before all of them could do so, another bullet flew in through the broken window, claiming the life of another guard. Seeing his men being helplessly slaughtered in front of him, Dominador's eyes turned bloodshot with his complexion very pale. Since the start of his successful career as an underground boss until now, this was the first time he made a mistake. He underestimated not only Mark's prowess but also his viciousness. Propping himself up, Dominator stared at his men. Although he regretted his mistake, there was no taking it back. Still, he could not fall here. Dominator looked at the window facing the backside of the building. Using his uninjured left arm, he bashed the windows broken and started to remove the railings outside the window with his sheer strength. The moment he grasped the metal railing, a figure of a man landed on top of the wall in front of the window. The figure was looking at Dominator with a smile. However, looking at the man, Dominator felt as if he was looking at a devil. With eyes brightly glowing red and the vicious smile plastered on his face, Mark stared at Dominator, who froze in fear. This was the very first time Dominator felt that the Reaper was grasping his neck. Day 9:18 a.m. South Building, 1st floor, Eastern Bacoor National High School, Bacoor City, Cavite. Looking at Mark standing outside the window, Dominator could not help but step back in fright. At that moment he stepped back, the red glow in Mark's eyes intensified even more. Furthermore, since Mark was standing at the wall with the sun behind him, the red glow in his eyes was emphasized even more. Dominator and his men shuddered while watching that sight. What do you want? Are you really going to massacre all of us? Gathering the remaining courage he had, Dominator bellowed. This bellow was then met with Mark tilting his head to the right with a look of confusion and disdain in his eyes. Well, why not? In the first place, it's your fault, all right? I command that you're too efficient in your moves. The moment that you heard about Captain Della Rosa's attitude towards me, you tried to meet and even invite me. If I'm correct, you want to try and get some hints and information from me. Of course, I will decline. You think everyone is an idiot and will be scared the moment you show up with your armed men behind you? The moment I declined, If you just let it be and stopped there, this wouldn't have led to this, right? You? What about me? There might be wrong with me, but the mistake here is yours. Well, since you're going to die anyway, let me tell you. I'm looking for a mutator to feed my pet and you made your move. That's really convenient for me since I don't really make moves on people who didn't offend me in any way. Also, no one will open their mouths to defend you guys even if all of you criminals were to die. So, I guess, I'll thank you for offering yourself as sacrifice. Puh. Dominator spewed a mouthful of blood. His injured innards quivered after hearing what Mark said. He already heard about Jeanette from his men, and that was how they managed to trick Mara into bringing Dorothy to them and captured the two to blackmail their targets. He never thought that since the start, the latter only viewed him as nothing but food for his pet infected. Damn it. Men. What are staring at him for? Shoot. Dominator, who staggered backwards, saw his men who seemed to be in a trance as they stared at Mark. With his shout, he managed to snap his men from their stupor and immediately raised their guns, firing at Mark outside the window. Ratatatatatatatatata. All of Dominator's armed men inside the room shot several bullets to the window, but the duration did not took too long. It was because at the moment they fired, they saw the man outside the window jumped back behind the wall. They could not fathom why the man did that. It was because outside that wall was a large number of infected that always lingered the area due to their activities. Then, buzz. The moment they stopped shooting, they heard a loud buzzing sound. The next thing they saw was Mark rising up above the wall with two dark brown wings moving in supersonic speed, buzzing behind his back. To their horror, Mark aimed his submachine gun towards them. All of them immediately dived towards cover, unfortunately for their injured leader. TSST, 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 TSST. Dominator's body was riddled with several new holes before falling backwards. With another buzz, they saw Mark flew up away from their sight. Seeing that the enemy left, some of them sighed in relief. Some of them along with their medic hurried towards Dominator, who fell on the floor bleeding profusely. Dominator was still alive and was even conscious, but his condition was too severe. He did not even have the energy to speak anymore. There was not a single movement could be observed from him while he stared at the ceiling. Soon, Dominator breathed his last. Still, his eyes did not close even after his death, as indignation, regret and sadness filled his mind. Several drops of tears could be seen from the corner of his eyes, which dropped on the floor soon afterwards. Seeing the death of their leader, the men around him could not help but remorse. Dominator was their only backing, and now that he was gone, even if they managed to survive their current ordeal, there was not much to expect about their future. For sure, if they did not die from being eaten by the infected, they would fell due to the wrath of the people in the settlement. Flee. That word echoed in the mind of every single one of them. Nevertheless, it seemed that they would not even be able to choose their death. They were about to move out when they saw several large vines slithering into the doors, making everyone step back in fright. The vines made their way towards Dominator's dead body and slowly enveloped it like a mummy. The vines then dragged the body out of the room and then up to the roof of the building on the other side. Hearing that the gunshots had stopped and the vines did not do anything to them, everyone sighed in relief. Plop. Plop. They then heard several uncanny sounds coming from outside. The moment they looked through the window, they saw bodies landing in front of the building. It was as if the bodies were tossed into their place. Some of the bodies twitched in pain after landing but soon stood up like nothing happened. Ah! They then heard several screams coming from their surviving brothers outside. After that, one of the bodies thrown in turned towards them and they could not help but feel goosebumps on their bodies. The people being thrown into the high school compound were actually infected. After gathering his subordinates, Captain Della Rosa with his men marched towards the dwelling area of Dominator's faction. Together with the soldiers, Roland, Nikki and the other members of Nikki's group followed. Daniel and the other two were also looking around for Dorothy when they heard from the soldiers that the girl was safe. When they got back to join Nikki and Roland, They saw that the two were preparing to go with the soldiers to confront Dominator and his men, and thus, the three tagged along. When they reached the entrance to the area where Dominator and his men were staying, they saw the troubled barangay chairwoman and city councilor along with their men. It was because the entrance was being blocked by layers of thick vines, and with the height of the vines that reached the second floor of the buildings beside the entrance, there was no way for them to pass through. Ah! Get away! Get away! Ah! Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a! Help! I won't do it anymore. I promise. Help me, ah! The soldiers and the others standing in front of the vines could not help but step back, hearing loud screams, gunshots and pleas from the other side of the vines. The feelings of horror, pain and remorse infused within those screams even made the hair on their bodies stand on end. Just what in the world is happening in there? Councillor Reynald spoke with a grim face. They were called here by Captain De La Rosa so they could finally deal with the thorn called Dominator, but they could not fathom what was happening now. Captain De La Rosa, do you have any ideas? The councillor asked. I don't have any idea either. I only know that Mark, the person we invited earlier, clashed with Dominator and his men. What? Then, though he had doubts, Councillor Reynald could not help but think that what was happening had to do with the person Captain De La Rosa pointed out. If that was really the case and that person was able to do this much suffering to Dominator's men, then no wonder that even the aloof squad captain looked respectful in front of him. Frowning, Captain De La Rosa turned to his men. Any of you, go climb to the second floor and see what is happening. The captain ordered. Nevertheless, a voice sounded from above the moment he finished his order. There's no need for that, Captain. While everyone was searching where the voice came from, several thick vines appeared from the roof of the building, making their way to the ground. As the scene was too surreal, everyone stepped back in fright, with Roland as the exception. Given that he was together with Mark since yesterday, there was no way he would not realize who these vines came from. Soon, the vines formed a ladder on the face of the building leading towards the rooftop. Realizing that Mark wanted them to climb up, Roland went towards the ladder and checked if it was safe to climb up. Since the vines were strong enough, Roland looked towards Nikki. "Nee, let's go." "D, what's going on?" Nikki approached, but she still looked warily at the vines. "It's not dangerous. Mark probably wanted us to climb up." "Mark." "That's right. Let's go." Roland then climbed up the ladder without hesitation. Seeing that her boyfriend was not even a little bit afraid of the vines, Nikki followed. Next were Nikki's group mates, followed by Captain De La Rosa, Alderic, Joey and Irene, while the rest of the soldiers were ordered to stand by. Out of curiosity, Barangay Chairwoman Kat and Councillor Reynald along with a few of their men also followed. Halfway the ladder, they could finally see what was happening on the other side of the vines blocking the way. And to describe what they saw was hell for the men of Dominator's faction. There were dozens of infected inside running after the armed men. Though the men had guns with them, there was no way for them to kill all the infected chasing after them. After they killed one, another would replace it, and the cycle repeated until they used up their ammunition and succumbed to the grasp and bites of the infected. Despite the fact that the ones climbing on the vine ladder was open for Dominator's men to see, none of them spared a glance at them, as everyone were busy fending off for themselves. A single lapse on their focus could easily end their struggle in the worst way. Reaching the rooftop, everyone was dumbfounded. There, they saw a man, a green-haired girl, a golden dog and an oversized four-horned rhinoceros beetle. They were all watching the scene below as if they were watching a movie. The two people and dog were even eating ready-to-eat popcorn. Looking at the four, they saw that the vines they had just climbed on were directly connected to the hair of the girl. To the side, they could see a roll of vines stained with blood that had the shape of a person. Nevertheless, they instinctively chose to ignore it. At their main purpose there was the man eating popcorn, Mark. "Mark, Emika, what's happening?" Roland immediately approached the two to ask what was happening. "You already saw while climbing, right?" Mark said as he another piece of popcorn on his mouth. "We saw, but," Roland also looked troubled. Even though it was already the 5th day of the apocalypse, the scene below was just too much for him. Looking at the current Mark, It felt that he was playing with the lives of people below like it was nothing. It was then that the soldiers stepped forward. "Mark, did you let those infected in?" Captain Della Rosa asked with a frown. It could be said that it was still fine if Dominador's men were all killed, but if the infected managed to breach the settlement, it would not be a good scenario. "Don't worry about that. We didn't break any walls or opened gates to let those in. Also, we just threw in enough to deal with the remaining people there. I'll leave the cleaning of the bodies to you all, but I'll deal with the infected afterwards." Mark replied nonchalantly, making Captain Della Rosa was speechless. It was then that Irene interjected. "Mark, what about the abducted women and children? Are they safe?" To her question, Mark did not speak, since her was chewing on his food and just pointed to a certain direction. Everyone stepped closer to the edge of the roof to see what he was pointing at and saw several rooms which windows and doors were being sealed securely with thick vines. Swallowing his food, Mark spoke. "The women and children are there. They aren't fine, but they are alive. You soldiers can take them out after we're done here." "What about Dominator?" Counselor Reynald could not help but ask with his usual tone to people around him. With everything that was happening below, there was no way that that monster would stay quiet. To his question, however, Mark frowned. Though he knew this politician, there was no connection between them. To ask with a tone like Mark was one of his subordinates, who would not feel displeased. Hearing the counselor's tone and seeing the displeasure on Mark's face, Captain Della Rosa could not help but speak. "Mark, just pardon his tone, since he always speak like that. Captain Della Rosa should mediate without fail. If not, with what happened to Dominador's faction, it was hard to say that the faction of these couple of politicians would be able to handle him." On the other hand, the chairwoman elbowed her husband's side and urged him to apologize. "Right. I'm just shocked, so I can't help but raise my voice." Seeing that they chose to compromise, Mark's frown eased. He then spoke. "Emika, release the vines on Dominator." "Hi." On Mark's command, Emika started to move the vines away from the human-shaped roll to the side. Soon enough, Dominador's dead body was revealed for everyone to see. Everyone except for Roland found it inconceivable. Dominator had been a headache for their factions due to his prowess and manpower, but to think that he would be done in like this. Not only that he died, even his men were still being slaughtered like lambs. After a few minutes, Mark then stood up. "Almost done. It's time to eliminate the scraps." Under everyone's confused eyes, Mark picked up his sniper rifle and aimed at a certain direction while crouching. They saw that he was aiming at a closed single-room toilet beside the school building. Bang! The shot passed through the closed plastic door. In a few seconds, blood seeped through the gap between the door and the floor, indicating that he hit someone inside. Everyone's eyes dilated to that. This was cheating for sure. Then, it happened several times. Though there were times Mark shot a person in the open a few times, there were times that he made his shots pass through the wooden classroom door, windows and toilets. And every time he did that, they would hear a scream filled with pain or blood seeping under the door or splashing out of the window. The soldiers and the people of the local government could not help but shudder to this. It just indicated that no one could hide from this man in front of them. Firing his last shot, Mark stood up and stretched his body. "All right, time to clean up." Mark then made the large beetle climb on his back and without hesitation, leapt down the building, making everyone gasp in fright. Day 5 to 9:27 a.m. Second grade building rooftop, Queens Row Elementary School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. Mark jumping off the roof like that made everyone tense up. Most of them hurried to the edge of the roof to what Mark wanted to do. Buzzz, halfway the fall, they heard a buzzing sound as the beetle tightly clutching Mark's body flapped its wings, slowing his descent. TSST, 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 TSST. As Mark descended, he started shooting the infected that were attracted to the sound of the beetle's wings. As soon as he landed, the beetle detached from his back and flew back to the roof, leaving Mark to fend for himself alone, facing several dozens of infected. Without a change in his expression, Mark drew his machete with his right hand and held the submachine gun on his left. Blood of the infected splashed into the air and spurted to the ground as Mark started to eliminate the infected coming to attack him. Body after body, the infected fell at a constant rate. Click. Click. Failing to keep count on his ammo, the submachine gun finally ran out. However, instead of retreating, he kept pacing forward as a smile started to bloom on his lips. He started running faster and faster, hacking every single infected that came across him. During the time he killed Dominator, he made Laylaps throw in the infected from the outside. All in all, there should be at least 30 thrown in. Adding Dominator's men that turned after being bitten after subtracting those he killed, there should be at least 100 infected here now. Still, the number did not faze him, but he even felt more and more exhilarated as the battle lasted longer. The feeling was similar back then at the rooftop of the city hall when he fought that huge woodman. On the roof, Captain Della Rosa and the others were watching Mark with a stern expression. As he could not help it, the squad captain turned towards Nikki and Roland. "I heard that you two knew him before the apocalypse, am I right?" To the captain's question, the two nodded. "I knew him since first year high school. Why do you ask?" Roland said with a confused expression. "Can you tell me what kind of person he is before the outbreak?" Roland hesitated to answer. "If it's inconvenient, then it's fine if you don't answer. I'm just curious because he can kill living people and the infected without batting an eyelid. I'm thinking if he had some criminal records involving killing people or at least getting involved in fights often." Captain Della Rosa said, making the others listening nod in agreement. There was no way for a normal person to display the behavior Mark was exhibiting. "Please, don't judge our friend like that," Nikki interjected with a frown. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm not judging him or anything, it's just peculiar." Captain Della Rosa tried to appease her. It was then that Roland spoke while shaking his head. "Mark, he didn't have any criminal records for sure, and for fights, it's even more impossible. You won't probably believe me, but Mark is a timid person." "Timid?" Irene could not help but ask, and then she looked at Mark below, who was smiling while he slaughtered the infected. "Yes, timid. He doesn't like talking to people and would stay away from anyone as far as possible. Even to us, his friends, his vocabulary is very limited. If he doesn't even interact with people, how he would be involved into fights or even kill someone? For the past 3 years, he even shut himself away from the world, only spending his time inside his house and barely going out." Roland replied while shrugging his shoulders. It was now time for Captain Della Rosa to frown. It was because looking at Mark and his actions, how he killed the infected and wiped out Dominator's men, there was not a tint of a timid person on him. Rather, there was only a silhouette of a bloodthirsty person. It was then that Roland spoke once more while looking at Mark below. "Well, there are instances that he displays that sharp eyes and smile though." Hearing that, everyone looked at him, urging Roland to continue. "Back then, I'm the one tending at my aunt's internet cafe, and Mark was a frequent customer there before he became a shut-in. When he is playing zombie survival games, war games and everything that involved killing monsters and other players, he will start to let out that expression once he started to get too immersed in playing." Roland then sighed before continuing. "Looking at that expression of his, it makes you feel that he belonged to the world of the game that he is playing than being just a player in front of the computer. His current expression and the expression he had back then, there is no doubt that it is similar. It's as if he belongs to this chaotic world now." As Captain Della Rosa heard Roland's explanation, he came into a realization, and pity could be seen in his face. "What's wrong, Captain?" Irene asked as she saw his expression. "I think I know the answer to the question in my mind now, and thought that it is a pity." "Pity?" Irene asked once more while everyone waited for his answer. Captain Della Rosa then looked at Roland. "Your description of Mark coincides with what I have in mind. If I'm correct, he is similar to those people who were born for a chaotic world. They are mostly quiet people and tend to stay away from crowds. However, when chaos comes that they needed to spring into action and fight for the benefit of themselves or the people around them, their potential is unleashed. Their prowess is higher than common people, and even some of them, despite living a normal life, can rival a fully trained soldier. At the face of threat, instead of cowering, they can still let out a smile, and the more they are cornered, the more their prowess increase. Looking at the bloody scene below, Captain Della Rosa stared at Mark's expression before continuing. This is also why I asked if he had a record of killing someone or if he gets involved in fights often. It's because people like those in the modern society can only be found in the military, private armed groups, or criminals. People like them in the military can easily climb up ranks, and criminals with the same traits tend to become slippery and notorious. By how you described Mark, it seemed that he managed to rein himself by immersing in video games. Nevertheless, the traits are similar. I heard from my son before that there are ranking in those kinds of games, right? How did he fare when he started to behave like that? Captain Della Rosa turned towards Roland, waiting for his answer. When he smiled like that while playing, he's like a rampaging madman. He starts to dominate the game room, and if he was playing first-person shooters, he tends to get kicked out of the room due to the very high level of skill he was displaying. It's a pity, right? If he's in the military, he'll probably have a very high rank now. Might even be higher than mine. Hearing that, everyone on the roof could only accept Captain Della Rosa's theory. While they were talking, they heard Mark shouting from below. "What are all of you talking about? Get down here already." Jolted away from their thoughts, they saw that all the infected below were all killed already. They were too immersed about what Captain was saying that they neglected what was happening below. Hearing the shout, Emika started to cover her body along with Laylaps with vines and jumped off the edge. She and Laylaps slowly descended with the vines' support. The beetle also followed suit, flying towards the ground, while the others were left dumbfounded on the roof. Since they were all normal people with the exception of a few evolvers that still had no ability to descend off the rooftop like that, they could only use the ladder once more. The vines then that blocked the entrance started moving, making the soldiers and barangay police waiting below jump back in fright. When they saw that their leaders were finally going down, they all sighed in relief and watched the vines clear up the way. With the faction leaders on the lead, they entered the area that was once annexed by Dominator and his men. Now, however, all that were left were lifeless bodies that littered the place. Upon entering, the first thing they saw was Mark and Emika, who were gathering the guns and other weapons used by the men under Dominator's rule. While entering, Irene's nose irritated due to the heavy smell of blood in the surroundings. She was a soldier in the military, but the scene and smell was still too heavy for her. She then approached Mark, who was putting the guns into a large basket made of green thick vines. "Hey, is it really necessary to wipe out all of them?" Irene asked while covering her nose. After all, it was not just the smell of blood, there was also the smell of rotting flesh in the air due to the number of infected. Though the infected were not really rotting, there was still the bad rot-like smell being emanated from their exposed wounds. To Irene's question, Mark glanced at her and answered while pointing at the direction where the canteen building was located. The first floor of the building was still covered in vines, however. Once you enter those rooms behind the vines, you'll sure regret that you didn't have the opportunity to kill even a single one of these people. At the end of Mark's sentence, he kicked one of the dead bodies that belonged to Dominator's men. Irene was skeptical about what Mark said, so she started to make her way towards the building Mark pointed at. "Emika, remove the vines there." "Hi." The vines around the canteen building receded while Irene was making her way with a few curious soldiers that followed behind her. However, the moment all the vines were removed and they stepped into the vicinity of the building, their eyes dilated. They could smell an uncanny and disgusting smell emanating from the place. For the male soldiers and the non-virgin female soldiers, this smell was something they knew, and it sure was not a good sign, as Mark already pointed out before that the missing women and children were kept into these rooms. Entering the room, they saw the abducted women and children. Most of them were naked while some only had dirty rags to cover their bodies. All of their eyes were dispirited and they all looked undernourished. Even worse, there were some of them that were obviously tortured while doing the act, as purplish bruises and wounds were seen on their skin. Upon seeing that there were people entering the room, Most of the women and children retreated in fright towards the furthest corner, cowering in fear. They all tried to shrink their bodies as much as they could while wishing that they could not be seen. Some of the women immediately shielded the children on their backs. Still, not all were able to retreat. There are those who were conscious but could not move anymore due to the state of their bodies. And even worse, there were some who were unconscious. Some might think that those who were left lying on the floor were just sleeping, but with all the commotion that happened outside, it was impossible for them to continue sleeping. Captain Della Rosa also stepped into the door and saw the situation inside. Clenching his fists in anger, he bellowed to his stunned subordinates. "All of you! Snap out of it! All the men! Get out! Call all the female personnel we had and also call for female volunteers. Get the medics and doctors here ASAP." Roland, Nikki and her group also saw what was going on inside. The two women hurriedly drive the men away, making them wait outside. Irene, who was the first to enter, could not help but tear up seeing the state these women and children were in. Furthermore, it was obvious that the trauma they received was too deep, that they did not even realize that they were soldiers and help was coming. Unable to stomach what she had just saw, Irene stepped out of the room to calm herself when he heard a voice in front of her. "Believe me now?" Looking at the source of the voice, Irene shook her head. "It's our fault, isn't it? As soldiers, we failed to fulfill our duties." Irene lamented. "I can't be helped." Captain Della Rosa, who had just finished ordering his subordinates, interjected between Mark and Irene's conversation. Fury was apparent on his face without a doubt. "We lacked both manpower and firepower to deal with these bastards. If it was even done wrongly, it's more likely that we will find these people being used as a shield." Captain Della Rosa then looked at Mark. "If it's not for you, these people might have to suffer even longer. So we can only thank you." Captain Della Rosa bowed his head. These two are really good soldiers. Mark thought. "Anyway, I'm getting ammunition and guns from their armory, all right? Feel free to do so. If it was within the law before the apocalypse, you can't but F***ck the law now, right?" Captain Della Rosa cursed, not being able to hold his anger any longer. Soon, the medics and doctors came. After realizing that they were finally saved, the women and children inside all released their emotions through tears. It was then that one of the doctors examining an 8-year-old unconscious girl shouted, "Captain, what's wrong?" Captain Della Rosa hurriedly approached. "This girl, she's on the verge of death. That's..." Captain Della Rosa's eyes dilated. "She has several bone fractures on her ribcage. There were also signs of tearing in her cervix. Her sex organ was even bleeding at the moment. There are also swellings on her body indicating that she had been hit with something hard several times. Her breaths are already shallow and her temperature is already below normal. It won't be long till she breathes her last." Everyone who heard the doctor could not help but feel down. The women and children were finally saved, but they were very late for this little girl. "Give me the records of these people. Let me check if she has relatives remaining. We should inform them." Captain Della Rosa ordered, and a stack of paper was soon given to him. There were no pictures on the papers but pencil sketches of the missing people. Still, he managed to find the accurate record for the dying girl. Seeing the record, the captain shook his head. "What's wrong, Captain?" Irene approached and looked at the record. She also had the same expression as the captain afterwards. The girl was one of the first children to have gone missing, and she did not have a single relative left. Her disappearance was only reported by the assigned caretaker of the orphaned children in the settlement. Then, while the two lamented about the fate of the girl, someone took a peek at the paper from behind them and spoke. "No relatives, huh? In that case, can I have her?" Everyone who heard that looked at Mark, who spoke those words. Day 5 to 10:02 a.m. First year building, Eastern Bacoor National High School, Queens Row Area A, Bacoor City, Cavite. "What are you saying?" Irene could not help but ask the moment he turned to Mark. "You didn't hear me. I asked you guys if I can have her. That's all clear, isn't it?" Mark replied indifferently. "You?" Irene felt too exasperated that she could not think of what to say anymore. They already felt guilty due to their incompetence as soldiers and even more down seeing the dying girl in front of them, but all of a sudden, Mark voiced a very unreasonable request behind them. Irene, calm down. Captain Della Rosa patted Irene's shoulder before turning to Mark. Can you elaborate further? Though I understand that you want us to hand over this girl to you, can you at least give your reason? As Mark suddenly asked for a dying person, Captain Della Rosa could not fathom what Mark's goal in this was. Hearing the squad captain's question, Mark held his chin between his right index finger and thumb for a moment before replying. I can't go into specifics, but you can say that it's my own research. Research? Don't tell me that you're a scientist. I won't believe it. Irene interjected. I'm not a scientist, all right. Anyways, I really can't go into specifics. All I can say that I have an experiment that I want to try, and that dying girl there is the first suitable subject I encountered so far. Experiment? Captain Della Rosa frowned. It seemed that it would be hard for him to accept giving a person to be experimented upon. Well, you can only say yes or no in any case. That girl is already dying. If the experiment I wanted to try comes to a success, there is a chance that she can keep her life and I will take her in. If it fails, there was no issue at all even if she died because of the experiment. Unless any of you have the confidence, equipment or ability to save her. Mark said nonchalantly, making everyone listening ponder. Before Captain Della Rosa and Irene was able to reply back to Mark, the doctor examining the girl spoke. Captain, I think it's better if you agree to this man. Everyone turned towards him and he continued speaking. We don't have any of the things he pointed out. We don't have the equipment or enough medicine to keep her alive. At this rate, this girl will die. Instead of trying to ask that man about his reasons, just give him this girl and ask later. Every second that you wasted reasoning with him is a second less for this girl to live. It's not like I agree with him experimenting on another person, but it's not like we can do anything either other than watch her slowly die. The doctor explained. I didn't expect that there will be someone that open-minded here. Mark voiced. To his words, however, the doctor shook his head. It's not being open-minded, it's just having the lack of choices to choose from. Hearing everything, Captain Della Rosa sighed while Irene clenched her fists tightly. All right. I agree. Mark, you can do what you want with this girl. If you need something else, just say it. Captain Della Rosa spoke with helplessness apparent in his face. I don't need anything. Just get a stretcher and bring the girl to our vehicle. I'll do the work there. Just hurry up. I need her before she died, since I have no use for a dead body. In any case that you are still reluctant to, I left quite an amount of weapons and ammunition in the armory and barely touched the food storage. You can consider those as exchange for this half-dead girl. Hearing his indifferent voice, most of the people around tending the women and children frowned. Nevertheless, no one else questioned him. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Carrying a large bag made of vines filled with guns and ammunition, Mark then went out soon after with two soldiers lifting a stretcher carrying the dying girl. They hurriedly made their way towards the vehicle. Behind them, Amika, Laylaps and the beetle followed closely. On Laylap's back was the body of Dominator that was still covered in thick vines. Mark. Going back to the vehicle, Mara shouted as she caught sight of Mark. Nothing happened, right? Yeah, nothing happened. My sister also stayed put, not even moving from her seat. All right. You all of you wait here outside the car, Mark said to Mara and the others while beckoning the two soldiers to put the girl inside the vehicle. It seemed that these two soldiers were not aware of Jeanette's circumstances. They only glanced at her before putting the stretcher with the girl at the floor of the vehicle. Hearing Mark shoo her out, Mara felt disappointed. Still, she could only turn around and leave. She had already accepted that her sister was gone during the time Mark left her sister in her care. Mara tried talking to her, but she only received a silent stare from her, making her feel disappointed. Nevertheless, she still wanted to spend her time with her sister despite what she was now. While Mara had those thoughts in her mind, she heard Mark speak. I'm not barring you from interacting with your sister. I just said before that you can't take her away due to several reasons, but I never said that you can't meet her. Well, I'll explain some of the reasons to you later since I have urgent business to do. Mark then turned to Emika. Emika, wait here and look after Dominador's body, alright? Let's return together later after I'm done. Hi, no problem. Seeing that the soldiers were done, Mark then went into the vehicle and closed the door, leaving the others outside. Mara went to sit on a concrete bench nearby. Hearing what Mark said made Mara happy. There, she realized that she had been over-exaggerating things, leading her to being tricked by Dominator. It even led her to betraying her friends, which made her feel ashamed. Emika, on the other hand, started playing with the large beetle happily. It was a really good trait of her to find something fun to do anywhere. Soon, Mara and Emika started talking to each other. Given the personality of the two, it was not hard for them to open up to each other. Asterisk 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 inside the vehicle, after putting away the bag of weapons to the back, Mark looked at the girl whose consciousness were getting weaker for every second that passed by. He then started to take out several things from his bag and from the storage area of the vehicle. Soon, beside the girl, a large jar with floating crystals could be seen along with a pair of tongs. Beside the jar was a small bottle of yellowish thick liquid with reddish floating strands. Mark then kneeled beside the body of the girl. Raising his right hand with concentration, his eyes and hands started to glow with a milky white light. He then held the girl's forehead and the white glow started to seep into her head like magic. What he was doing at the moment was trying to stabilize the waning consciousness of the girl. As the girl was unconscious, on the verge of death, both her conscious and subconscious were on the verge of dissipation. Since Mark could use this energy to calm down and stabilize Abigail's consciousness and emotions during the time she was agitated, he thought of trying it to someone on the verge of death or on coma if it would work, but never had the chance to do so. Though he had no expectation that it would work on comatose patients, there might be possibilities on patients on the same state of the girl in front of him. Still, if he failed to stabilize her conscious, there was no point to continue, since even if he managed to treat her body, a living body without consciousness was no different from a dead person. There, he was right. Carefully monitoring the mental and emotional fluctuations of the girl, he found that the energy he was channeling was doing its work as he intended. Though the consciousness of the girl was still too weak, it was now stabilized. If he did not manage to do so, he might have jumped onto the other experiment he intended to do, but since he succeeded, he decided to continue with the current one. The girl's breathing was still ragged and her body's condition was still getting worse. Even if he managed to stall the dissipation of her conscious, she would still die. Without wasting time, he reached for the tongs and opened up the jar containing the floating crystals. He then carefully took out the newly formed pale-colored crystal. During the 6 years he spent observing the largest crystal produce the smaller ones, he had several hypotheses, and the most realistic was that the crystal was gathering some sort of substance or energy from the air and converts that energy into the smaller crystals. He came to that idea since every time the crystal produced a marble-sized crystal, it would exude a bright purple light and he would start to feel some sort of strange energy entering his head and seeping into his skin. That energy might also be the reason why the infected around his house were attracted to the crystal in the first place. Now that the large crystal suddenly produced an odd-looking crystal, there would be no other reason for this but the outbreak, and the substance present in the air at the moment should be the mutagen. The similarities about the marble-sized crystal with pale color and the crystal that was found on the huge cat back in the city hall further confirmed this theory of his. These crystals were likely to be a concentrated crystallization of mutagen similar to the golden fruit Mikio gave his mother. Still, despite those ideas, theories were still theories and were needed to be proven, or else mishaps could happen if it was concluded just like that. Mark knew that the large crystal produced that deep purple crystal every year, and considering the time, it was not far to conclude that the large crystal would be able to produce this pale crystal every 4 days, since it was just 4 days since the apocalypse started when the crystal released that bright light. Considering that, he decided to try this crystal on this girl and see what effect it could bring. There were 2 conclusions he was expecting. One was that it could induce evolution abruptly, while the other was to allow the body adapt to mutagen and evolve in a quicker rate. If one of those 2 happened, It would likely be that this girl would be saved, as her body would surely be able to handle her injuries after evolving. There was another thing he could think of happening, but that was not the focus at the moment. There, Mark made the girl have contact with the pale-colored crystal and see if it would get absorbed like the purple crystal with golden glow that entered his body 6 years ago, but unfortunately, it did not. He was thinking that he could make the girl swallow the crystal, but she was unconscious and there was the chance of her choking to death if this crystal was forced into her throat. Nevertheless, he had no choice but to try. He put the crystal on her mouth without making her swallow it and was about to get water. In the worst case, he would put effort to at least enforce her consciousness to make her swallow the crystal. However, while the crystal was inside her mouth, Mark's eyes squinted as a pale purple bright light was emitted by the crystal. The crystal cracked several times before turning into smoke-like particles that entered the girl's throat through her breathing. Mark was surprised by it but also felt elated. Now to think of it, the infected transfers their pathogen through saliva, don't they? Mark muttered as he watched the scene transpire in front of him. Thinking about it, it seemed that the crystal dematerialized after coming into contact with the girl's saliva. As the crystal was now ingested, Mark decided to observe what was going to happen. However, several seconds later, he started to feel that there was something missing. There was no reaction that could be seen from the girl's body either. Observing the girl, he frowned. Though he did not know why, he could feel that there was really something lacking. Mutagen, right? It affects the body reacting to circumstances and might be emotions, inducing evolution. The soldiers also said that it affects mostly children because of them being in their growth period. However, not all were being affected immediately, and the intensity of the effect also varies from person to person. Mark started to mull over what he knew as he started to feel that there was something missing at what he was doing. Mutagen reacts to different things: chemicals, virus, bacteria, a catalyst. No, not only those. Emika and Mikio came into his mind. The siblings both have plant-like abilities. Then, the infected around the city hall was affected by Mikio's mutation. Mark came to a realization and his eyes opened wide. Genes. Right. Genes, DNA and the like could also be catalysts. Especially those who have special genes either foreign or not in their bodies. Thinking about it, it might also be the reason why there were people like him who evolved faster and stronger than the others. Everyone was infected with the neutral strain of mutagen, and of course, it was not only him who was doing their best to the extent of overcoming their limits. Yet, why was the rate and strength of evolution different? It should be because of genes. Looking at the girl, the reason her body was not reacting to the crystal was likely because she did not have a strong enough gene in her body to induce her evolution. Thinking of that, an absurd idea hit him. He grabbed the clean small kitchen knife from his bag. He then, without hesitation, slit his left arm with the knife. It felt painful but not above what he could endure. Seeing the blood started to trickle, he aimed the drops of blood inside the girl's mouth. It did not take long for his blood to stop dripping out, however, as his regeneration kicked in soon after. He was sure the blood that dripped into the girl's mouth was not enough. It was the first time he felt frustrated about his absurd regeneration rate. One more time, he made slice on his arm. This time, the wound was larger and more blood came out. He continued on making his blood drop into the girl's mouth before his wound closed once more. He was about to make the third slice on his arm, but then, there was finally some reaction from the girl's body. Her face started to flush red and her body temperature started to rise. It also looked like that her body was in even more pain. Still, Mark was elated. It was because that was the symptoms of someone was undergoing evolution. It meant that his experiment was a success. At that moment, however, someone jumped on him from his back, pinning him down.